What really happened between Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 and Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. If you read the very first page of the Bible carefully, you will notice something deeply puzzling. Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." That sounds like a complete beginning. But the moment we move into Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, the scene suddenly changes. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. Now think about this logically for a moment. Why would a perfect creator make his very first work as a chaotic, desolate world submerged in darkness? The answer is simple: he did not. The Bible is not wrong, but history may have misunderstood the translation. When we look closely at the grammar of ancient Hebrew, Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 does not appear to describe the original act of creation. It appears to describe a scene of ruin. The earth was not created in emptiness. It had become desolate after a terrifying catastrophe. And what was that catastrophe? Science has shown that 65 million years ago, a disaster from outer space struck this planet, wiped out the dinosaurs, completely blocked the sunlight, and plunged Earth into a dark ice age. The chilling coincidence is that this description matches word for word the condition of Earth in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. So what is truly hidden between the period at the end of Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 and the first word of Genesis chapter 1 verse 2? If Earth was a ruined scene, then who or what lived here before us? Who did that 65 million year era belong to? And what terrifying force intervened, leading the Creator to wipe the entire planet clean and begin again from the beginning? Let's begin to unlock this secret right now. The truth about the 7 days of creation. If you grew up in church, or if you ever attended Sunday school classes, you probably know this story by heart. The book of Genesis describes how God created the entire universe, the earth and life, in only 1 week. On the first day, God said, "Let there be light." Light appeared, and he separated the light from the darkness, calling the light day and the darkness night. This was the first moment when order entered a reality that had not yet been formed in a way human eyes could understand. On the second day, he created the firmament, or the sky, to separate the waters above from the waters below. On the third day, the waters were gathered together. Dry land appeared, and the ground began to bring forth grass plants, seed-bearing herbs, and fruit trees, according to their kinds. On the fourth day, the sun, the moon, and the stars were appointed to govern the day and the night, and to mark seasons, days, and years. On the fifth day, the seas were filled with living creatures, and the sky was filled with birds. On the sixth day, land animals appeared, and then the crown of creation was placed at the center of mankind. Adam was formed from the dust of the ground, and God breathed the breath of life into his nostrils. On the seventh day, the work was completed, and God rested. This reading follows the 7-day rhythm of Genesis chapter 1, a structure that Bible Project also sees as a symbol of completion in God's creative work. Everything sounds complete, linear, and easy to understand. For millions of believers, this story forms the first foundation for how they see the world. God is the creator. The universe has order. Human beings bear the image of God. Marriage, labor, life, rest, worship. All of it begins in those first pages. For a child in church, this story feels deeply secure. The world has an origin, life has meaning, and behind everything that exists is the hand of God. But the greatest point of debate lies in the question of dates. In the 17th century, Archbishop James Ussher, a learned Irish scholar, carried out a massive chronological study. He did not work carelessly. He used biblical genealogies, the lifespans of the patriarchs' historical markers in the Old Testament, and Babylonian, Greek, and Roman sources to reconstruct a timeline from Adam to the ancient kingdoms, and then to the time of Jesus. His most famous conclusion placed the creation of the world in the year 4004 before Christ, specifically according to Ussher, on the evening before October 23rd in the Julian calendar. This chronology was printed and widely circulated in many English Bibles, deeply shaping the imagination of the Protestant world for many centuries. From there, a traditional picture formed in the minds of many believers. If creation took place around the year 4004, before Christ, and we add more than 2,000 years after Christ, then the entire history of the Earth and the universe is only about 6,000 years long. For many people, that number once felt very convincing. It seemed to come directly from the Bible. It seemed to protect the authority of Genesis. It made human history feel neat and orderly. Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, Jesus, the church, and then us. A clear straight line from the Garden of Eden to the modern world. But then humanity entered the age of geology, archaeology, paleontology, and astronomy, and the 6,000-year-old picture began to collide with facts too large to ignore. Geologists looked at rocks, minerals, sediment layers, ancient volcanoes, fossils, and radioactive isotopes. They did not see a planet only a few thousand years old. They saw an Earth with an unimaginably deep history, with its current age estimated at about 4.54 billion years, based on radiometric methods and data from meteorites, ancient rocks, and models of solar system formation. The United States Geological Survey presents the figure 4.54 billion years as the widely accepted age of the Earth and the solar system. Paleontologists dug into rock layers in North America and found the bones of Tyrannosaurus rex, one of the most famous predators ever to walk the land. The Smithsonian records that T-Rex lived about 66 to 68 million years ago, during the Cretaceous period in the region of what is now the western United States, including Montana and Wyoming. National Geographic also places T-Rex in the period around 68 million years ago. And then the evidence for the catastrophe at the end of the Cretaceous period appeared the Chicxulub impact crater on the Yucatan Peninsula. Modern geological studies place this event at around 66 million years ago, when a massive celestial body struck the Earth and contributed to the extinction of most non-avian dinosaurs, along with many other living species. The Natural History Museum describes this event as a major extinction event. Many geological sources identify Chicxulub as the key marker of that catastrophe. When we look up into the sky, the problem becomes even greater. Light from extremely distant galaxies needs billions of years to reach our eyes or our telescopes. Modern observations from the James Webb Space Telescope have seen galaxies whose light has traveled for more than 13 billion years, bringing astronomers back close to the very early period of the universe. One recent result summarized by Space.com shows that JWST's Cosmos Web survey reaches about 13 billion light-years, while other observations record light from very early galaxies that has traveled about 13.5 billion years. At this point, confusion appears. If the universe is only 6,000 years old, why can we see light that has traveled for billions of years? If the Earth is only 6,000 years old, why do rock layers, radioactive isotopes, and fossils all tell a much longer story? If dinosaurs once ruled the Earth tens of millions of years before humans, why do they not appear clearly in the Garden of Eden story, in the way an elephant or a lion might appear in a Sunday school picture? On the first day, God said, "Let there be light." Light appeared, and he separated the light from the darkness, calling the light day and the darkness night. This was the first moment when order entered a reality that had not yet been formed in a way human eyes could understand. On the second day, he created the firmament, or the sky, to separate the waters above from the waters below. On the third day, the waters were gathered together, dry land appeared, and the ground began to bring forth grass plants, seed-bearing herbs, and fruit trees, according to their kinds. On the fourth day, the sun, the moon, and the stars were appointed to govern the day and the night and to mark seasons, days, and years. On the fifth day, the seas were filled with living creatures and the sky was filled with birds. On the sixth day, land animals appeared, and then the crown of creation was placed at the center mankind. Adam was formed from the dust of the ground, and God breathed the breath of life into his nostrils. On the seventh day, the work was completed, and God rested. This reading follows the 7-day rhythm of Genesis chapter 1, a structure that Bible Project also sees as a symbol of completion in God's creative work. Everything sounds complete, linear, and easy to understand. For millions of believers, this story forms the first foundation for how they see the world. God is the creator. The universe has order. Human beings bear the image of God. Marriage, labor, life, rest. Worship, all of it begins in those first pages. For a child in church, this story feels deeply secure. The world has an origin, life has meaning, and behind everything that exists is the hand of God. But the greatest point of debate lies in the question of dates. In the 17th century, Archbishop James Ussher, a learned Irish scholar, carried out a massive chronological study. He did not work carelessly. He used biblical genealogies, the lifespans of the patriarchs, historical markers in the Old Testament, and Babylonian, Greek, and Roman sources to reconstruct a timeline from Adam to the ancient kingdoms and then to the time of Jesus. His most famous conclusion placed the creation of the world in the year 4004 before Christ, specifically according to Ussher on the evening before October 23rd in the Julian calendar. This chronology was printed and widely circulated in many English Bibles, deeply shaping the imagination of the Protestant world for many centuries. From there, a traditional picture formed in the minds of many believers. If creation took place around the year 4004, before Christ, and we add more than 2,000 years after Christ, then the entire history of the earth and the universe is only about 6,000 years long. For many people, that number once felt very convincing. It seemed to come directly from the Bible. It seemed to protect the authority of Genesis. It made human history feel neat and orderly. Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, Jesus, the church, and then us. A clear straight line from the Garden of Eden to the modern world. But then humanity entered the age of geology, archaeology, paleontology, and astronomy, and the 6,000-year-old picture began to collide with facts too large to ignore. Geologists looked at rocks, minerals, sediment layers, ancient volcanoes, fossils, and radioactive isotopes. They did not see a planet only a few thousand years old. They saw an Earth with an unimaginably deep history, with its current age estimated at about 4.54 billion years, based on radiometric methods and data from meteorites, ancient rocks, and models of solar system formation. The United States Geological Survey presents the figure 4.54 billion years as the widely accepted age of the Earth and the solar system. Paleontologists dug into rock layers in North America and found the bones of Tyrannosaurus rex, one of the most famous predators ever to walk the land. The Smithsonian records that T-Rex lived about 66 to 68 million years ago during the Cretaceous period in the region of what is now the western United States, including Montana and Wyoming. National Geographic also places T-Rex in the period around 68 million years ago. And then the evidence for the catastrophe at the end of the Cretaceous period appeared the Chicxulub impact crater on the Yucatan Peninsula. Modern geological studies place this event at around 66 million years ago, when a massive celestial body struck the Earth and contributed to the extinction of most non-avian dinosaurs, along with many other living species. The Natural History Museum describes this event as a major extinction event. Many geological sources identify Chicxulub as the key marker of that catastrophe. When we look up into the sky, the problem becomes even greater. Light from extremely distant galaxies needs billions of years to reach our eyes or our telescopes. Modern observations from the James Webb Space Telescope have seen galaxies whose light has traveled for more than 13 billion years, bringing astronomers back close to the very early period of the universe. One recent result summarized by Space.com shows that JWST's Cosmos Web survey reaches about 13 billion light-years, while other observations record light from very early galaxies that has traveled about 13.5 billion years. At this point, confusion appears. If the universe is only 6,000 years old, why can we see light that has traveled for billions of years? If the Earth is only 6,000 years old, why do rock layers, radioactive isotopes, and fossils all tell a much longer story? If dinosaurs once ruled the Earth tens of millions of years before humans, why do they not appear clearly in the Garden of Eden story in the way an elephant or a lion might appear in a Sunday school picture? This enormous gap has divided people into two camps. One side relies on scientific evidence and concludes that the Bible is only a collection of myths. The other side wants to defend the faith, so it completely rejects modern science and insists that the 6 days of creation were 6 ordinary 24-hour days. Some people even use forced arguments, such as God intentionally placed fossils in the ground to test human faith. This is a very dangerous argument logically, because the Bible describes God as the one who is true. If he fabricated natural evidence in order to deceive human intelligence, he would become a deceiver. The truth is, a person of faith does not need to deny logic when standing before a dinosaur skeleton, and does not need to doubt the Bible when looking at astronomical research. This fierce conflict does not exist because science is wrong, or because the Bible is wrong. It exists because we have read Genesis too quickly. Let us analyze the logic of the original text. Genesis does not begin with the phrase, "the first day." It begins with an independent declaration in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is a complete act of creation. But as soon as we move into Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, the scene immediately becomes chaotic. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. The logic here is this: why would a perfect being create his first work as something desolate, dark, and disorderly? This sudden transition opens the door to a reasonable interpretation known as the gap theory. This theory points out that Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 is the original creation. After that, a massive event or catastrophe occurred, turning the earth into a ruined scene, as described in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. Based on this logic, the following 6 days of creation were not the process of God creating matter from nothing, but the process by which he cleaned, rebuilt, and restored order on a planet that had already been devastated, preparing it for the appearance of mankind. If this interpretation is correct, then the entire multi-billion-year history of the universe, the geological ages, the age of the dinosaurs, and the mass extinction catastrophes all fit completely within the Bible. All of those events are contained within the broken interval between Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. Discoveries about prehistory are no longer enemies of faith. They are simply the history of an ancient world that existed before the week of restoration took place. Once we understand this, the confusion begins to disappear. Dinosaurs or rocks billions of years old are not evidence against the Creator. On the contrary, they remind us that the concept of the beginning of the universe is far deeper than the 6,000-year timeline human beings have assigned for themselves. The key to reconciling science and religion was never truly hidden in laboratories or in arguments on the internet. It lies exposed in plain sight, right inside the broken gap between the first two verses of the Bible. Lucifer's flood. The flood before the time of Adam. But wait, if we accept the reality of a gap in time between verse 1 and verse 2 of the book of Genesis, then an even more terrifying mystery immediately appears. Let us reason through this for a moment. A universe created by God must carry order, purpose, and perfection. A primordial world with a complete ecosystem, with land, sea, and living creatures, was peaceful and stable. Then suddenly it became a desolate, dark scene of ruin in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. So what interrupted the order between these two verses? Surely some terrifying event must have overturned that order. The Hebrew phrase tohu wa bohu in verse 2 does not simply mean without form and void, as we usually read it. In the Old Testament, it carries the sense of desolation, ruin, and chaos. To prove this, look at the book of Isaiah, chapter 45, verse 18. There it is written very clearly, God did not create the earth to be empty. He did not create it in a state of tohu. The logic here is very clear. If the Creator did not create the earth in a ruined condition, then the ruin in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2 is the scene of a judgment, a catastrophe that occurred after the original creation. And from this clue, those who study the gap theory have identified a shocking concept, Lucifer's flood. Most of us know about the Great Flood in the time of Noah. That was the flood that occurred after mankind had multiplied and fallen into corruption. But the Bible may actually be concealing a first flood, a judgment by water that happened long before Adam was created. Read Genesis chapter 1, verse 2 again. Darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the face of the waters. Where did the water come from if the world had not yet been formed? If we read this through the gap theory, this is not a world waiting to be assembled. This is a primordial world that had just been submerged. This flood was not aimed at humanity. It was aimed directly at Lucifer's rebellion. So who was the real culprit? Forget the image of a red-horned devil holding a pitchfork in folk tales. The criminal record preserved in the Old Testament describes someone entirely different. The books of Isaiah and Ezekiel sketch the portrait of an anointed cherub. This was a radiant, perfected spiritual being standing in one of the highest positions within the heavenly order. But right at the peak of that authority, a corrupted impulse began to take root: pride. Now picture the scene at that time. This anointed being looked down upon the universe, looked down upon a primordial earth operating in perfect order. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, a reckless ambition began to rise within him. He no longer wanted to serve. His rebellion began with a thought: I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will be like the Most High. But he did not act alone. The book of Revelation, chapter 12, describes this act of rebellion like a cosmic coup. The image of a great dragon sweeping away 1/3 of the stars of heaven with his tail is not a fairy tale. It is a symbol showing that 1/3 of the angelic host had been persuaded and chose to stand with Lucifer in an uprising against the order of the Creator. But that coup failed, and judgment immediately came down. The New Testament closes the file on the final moment of that war with a chilling statement from Jesus. In Luke chapter 10, verse 18, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." Pay close attention to the physical action here, fall like lightning. This was not a gentle relocation or a quiet exile. This was the speed of punishment. When Lucifer and his rebellious army were expelled from the heavenly dimension, they were stripped of their authority and hurled with tremendous force into the physical world. And the place that absorbed the full impact of that colossal fall was the surface of the earth. The gap theory places this entire event precisely inside the opening, between verse 1 and verse 2 of Genesis. When this force of darkness crashed down, the primordial earth was immediately caught in the consequence. A planet that once had life, a planet with a perfect ecosystem, suddenly endured a physical catastrophe on a planetary scale. The surface of the earth was torn open. The light was completely extinguished. All primordial life was crushed. That is why in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, the earth suddenly falls directly into the condition of tohu wabohu, a desolate, shattered, empty ruin, submerged beneath dark waters. And now if you think the story of 1/3 of the angels falling to earth is only mythology, then look at what scientists have dug up. Many researchers have connected Lucifer's fall with the Chicxulub asteroid catastrophe about 65 million years ago. Science identifies a massive celestial body roughly 15 kilometers wide that slammed into Earth. Billions of tons of ash and dust rose into the atmosphere. The food chain collapsed. A nuclear winter covered the globe. Dinosaurs and giant predator species were completely wiped out. From the scientific point of view, as NASA, or the Natural History Museum, confirms this was the KT extinction. But from the perspective of the gap theory, could that asteroid be the physical trace left behind when Lucifer and the fallen angels were thrown down to earth? Of course, the Bible does not specifically record the word Chicxulub, and science also does not use machinery to measure the war of the angels. But when the two pictures are placed side by side, the overlap is chilling. An asteroid fell from the sky. Dust blocked out the sun, creating darkness. Temperature changes caused ice ages to appear and then melt, producing the deep and the waters. The ecosystem collapsed, leaving desolation. The earth fell into exactly the condition described in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. If this is true, then the 6 days of creation that follow in Genesis are not the story of God creating matter from nothing. They are a campaign of restoration. He stepped into a ruined scene. On the first day, he cleared the atmosphere and commanded sunlight to shine through the layer of ash and dust. Let there be light. On the second day, he re-established the firmament and separated the waters. On the third day, he caused dry land to appear from the vast ocean. On the fourth day, the system of the sun, the moon, and the stars was realigned to govern time. On the fifth and sixth days, a new ecosystem was established. And finally, Adam was created, entering a world that had been rebuilt, restored, and cleansed of the remains of an old era. This truth leads us to a deeper perspective than ever before. Before the Garden of Eden, there was a buried history. Before Adam, there was a world that had been judged. And before Noah's flood, there was Lucifer's flood. Of course, we need to maintain humility. The gap theory is an exceptionally compelling theological hypothesis. But it is not the only doctrine. You may fully believe in young earth creationism or in the day-age interpretation. Our purpose here is not to force one viewpoint, but to see this science is never the enemy of God. And God is not idle or careless fabricating fake fossil evidence to test us. If we dare to open that door correctly, the story of the beginning becomes far more majestic. It begins with a perfect original creation. It is followed by a rebellion that shook heaven, a judgment struck directly against the prehistoric world. And then the Creator stepped into that water-covered, darkened scene, spoke a word, and order returned. But let us pause for a moment. If we have already opened the door to the gap theory, why not step fully inside? If there truly was a span of millions, even billions of years, between Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 and Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, then what did the earth look like during that period? Was it merely a wild landscape where mindless dinosaurs roared? Or did there once exist radiant civilizations, massive cities ruled by intelligent beings, even before Adam was created? Let us open the Bible once more and turn to the book of the prophet Jeremiah chapter 4, from verse 23 to verse 26. Jeremiah was given by God a terrifying vision of the past. He wrote, "I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void, tohu wabohu. I beheld, and lo, there was no man. I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord and by his fierce anger." Now, let us analyze the chilling truth inside this passage. Jeremiah is seeing the same scene of being without form and void, exactly like Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. But he sees one detail that Genesis does not mention: ruined cities. Do you recognize the paradox here? In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve did not build any walled city or urban civilization. The first city recorded in the Bible was built much later by Cain. So whose cities did Jeremiah see destroyed in the primordial wrath of the Lord? There is only one answer. They were the ruins of pre-Adamic civilizations. Under Lucifer's rule before his fall, Earth may have been the dwelling place of spiritual beings, with physical forms, an ancient race possessing intelligence and technology far beyond our understanding. But let us make a logical calculation. Tens of millions or even billions of years buried inside that gap is an enormous span of time. It is far too long to contain only one empire or one generation of life. This brings us to an even more shocking question, a boundary that both mainstream science and traditional theology often fear to approach. What if the pre-Adamic world was not just a single kingdom? What if Earth had witnessed the rise and fall of many different advanced civilizations throughout those millions of years? We often take pride in seeing present humanity as the one and only peak. But what if history is not a straight line, but a series of cycles? This hypothesis is not baseless. It may be the only key that can decode one of the most absurd archaeological discoveries, one that mainstream science has tried hardest to bury the parallel existence of human-like beings and dinosaurs. Could human beings have lived alongside dinosaurs? If you think a civilization existing hundreds of millions of years before Adam sounds far-fetched, then archaeology is holding artifacts that could make any mainstream scientist break out in a cold sweat. They are called OOP arts, or out-of-place artifacts. Look at the iron spheres excavated from the hillsides of Klerksdorp, South Africa. The geological layer containing them is said to be up to 2.8 billion years old. And yet the grooves surrounding these iron spheres are shaped with such precise regularity that they appear almost perfectly manufactured, as though cut with modern machinery. Nature does not create perfectly symmetrical grooves like that on solid metal. But let us move closer to our own timeline. In the year 1891, in a small village in Morrisonville, Illinois, an elderly woman named Mrs. Culp was breaking a lump of coal to place into her stove. The coal split in two, and from inside it fell an 8-carat gold chain weighing about 12 grams, crafted with remarkable delicacy. Part of the coal still clung tightly to the chain, and the surface of the coal still preserved the imprint of it. By the year 1912, at a power plant in Thomas, Oklahoma, 2 workers also broke open a large lump of coal and were horrified to discover an iron pot sitting right in the middle of it. The notarized testimony of the worker, Frank J. Kennard, is still displayed at the Creation Evidence Museum in Texas. Science knows this very well. Coal is the fossilized remains of primeval forests, formed roughly 250 million to 300 million years ago. The question is this: who dropped a gold chain and an iron pot into that forest hundreds of millions of years before modern humans appeared? And if a technologically advanced civilization once existed, did they share this earth with dinosaurs? Mainstream science says that dinosaurs and human beings never encountered one another. But at the bottom of the Paluxy River in Texas, beside fossilized dinosaur footprints from the Cretaceous period, people found 12 perfect footprints of a two-legged creature that looked exactly like a human being. There are even footprints that appear to show human tracks stepping over dinosaur tracks. In the same nearby rock formation, they found a hammer with a wooden handle that had turned to coal. The hammerhead is made of an extremely complex iron chloride alloy, one that even our present technology would struggle to cast. And it does not stop there. Scientists also found the fossil of a finger. When placed under CT scan and X-ray imaging, the porous bone structure joints and tendon system inside were clearly visible. It was so perfect that researchers exclaimed, "If the owner of this finger knew how to play the violin, he could play even the most complicated compositions of Paganini." But the most shocking evidence, the one that strikes directly against Darwin's evolutionary picture, lies in Peru. These are the Ica stones. On the Nazca Plain, tens of thousands of black stones have been found carved with extraordinary precision. The images on these stones portray a highly advanced civilization. They had acupuncture-based anesthesia, performed brain transplants, and used telescopes to map the Milky Way. But what sends chills down the spine is the imagery of humans interacting with dinosaurs. Some carvings depict a man riding on the back of a triceratops while raising a weapon. Another carving shows a person riding on a pterodactyl as it flies through the air. Many people will quickly shout, "Those are just fakes drawn by local villagers." But Dr. Javier Cabrera, who spent his life studying the Ica stones, pointed out a fatal fact. These stones had already been discovered by the Spanish as far back as the 16th century. In the year 1571, the historian Juan de Santa Cruz recorded them, and at that time he called the dinosaurs carved on the stones dragons. How could Peruvian farmers in the 16th century accurately draw the shape of a triceratops hundreds of years before modern archaeologists unearthed the first bones of that animal? Even more astonishingly, in the year 2017, in the freezing Whitmore Mountains of Antarctica, a team of paleontologists reportedly found two fossilized human skeletons embedded in sedimentary rock. Dr. Marley from the University of Cambridge confirmed they are at least 600 million years old, and they are certainly human bones, not primate bones. The strange thing is that these skeletons were very small, resembling tiny humanoid people. You see tiny people 600 million years old. You see giants riding dinosaurs tens of millions of years ago. Their sizes may have differed. Their technologies may have differed. But all of them point to one truth. This earth was once home to many cycles of life, long before the Garden of Eden was established. But if you think those stones or footprints are only coincidences, then prepare yourself, because the most terrifying evidence is not found in the field. It lies inside the most advanced laboratories in the United States. In the year 2012, in Dawson County, Montana, a triceratops horn was excavated. This specimen was preserved at the Glendive Dinosaur and Fossil Museum. According to textbooks, Triceratops went extinct in the KT event 66 million years ago. Based on that number, mainstream scientists have never bothered to perform carbon-14 dating on dinosaur bones. Why? Because the carbon-14 method can only measure specimens with a maximum age of about 55,000 years. If dinosaur bones are truly 66 million years old, a carbon-14 test should return no result at all. It should come back completely blank. But Hugh Miller, the head of the Paleochronology Archaeology Group, decided to break that rule. He sent a sample of the Triceratops horn to the Center for Applied Isotope Studies at the University of Georgia for an independent and blind carbon-14 test, meaning the laboratory did not know what it was measuring. The results shook the foundations of paleontology. The decomposed collagen layer returned an age of 33,570 years, with an error margin of only 120 years. The carbonate sample inside the horn returned an age of 41,010 years. Stop and think about those numbers. Not 65 million years, but 33,000 years. These numbers prove absolutely that dinosaurs were not completely wiped out millions of years ago. Many individuals survived, continued to exist, and walked the earth alongside prehistoric humans or alongside the beings of pre-Adamic civilizations. And this was not a single isolated mistake. Miller's team continued to perform carbon-14 testing on the bones of 10 different dinosaurs. Astonishingly, all the results returned ages ranging only from 22,000 to 39,000 years, not millions of years. But that is still not the most outrageous part. In March of the year 2005, in the prestigious scientific journal Science, Dr. Mary Schweitzer published a discovery that shocked the world. She found soft tissue inside the thigh bone of a Tyrannosaurus rex, believed to be 68 million years old, found in Hell Creek, Montana. When these tissues were rehydrated, visible blood vessels, bone cells, and connective tissues could still be seen intact and elastic. Biologically speaking, this should be impossible. Scientists know that soft tissue should completely decompose in less than 1 million years, even under the best natural preservation conditions. More recently, researcher Mark Armitage also reported a similar discovery of soft tissue in a Triceratops horn. He pointed out an obvious truth. The preservation of these cells is impossible if dinosaurs truly died 66 million years ago. And do you know how mainstream science reacted to this hard evidence? Instead of rewriting the textbooks, they chose to silence the truth. Mark Armitage was immediately fired by the University of California because he dared to present a view supportive of creationism. The Isotope Center at the University of Georgia, after realizing it had just performed carbon-14 dating on dinosaur bones, immediately refused to conduct any further tests. Editors at the Geological Society of America refused to publish the data from the Paleochronology Group without providing an explanation. Even the famous paleontologist Jack Horner, the man who directly excavated the T-Rex containing soft tissue, flatly refused a $23,000 grant simply to have the bones carbon-14 dated. They were afraid. They did not dare to perform carbon-14 testing because they knew very well that the results would shatter the 65 million year doctrine they had worked so hard to build. But no matter how much they try to cover it up, the truth is still there. The blood vessels inside the T-Rex bone, the human footprints beside dinosaur tracks, and the ruins of destroyed cities in the book of Jeremiah are all crying out the same message. Earth's history is not a dull, straight line of evolution. It is a vast and turbulent cycle. Before the Garden of Eden, there was a buried history. Before Adam, there were civilizations that had been judged. And those prehistoric giants once walked the same land as intelligent beings swept away by the primordial wrath of the Creator, leaving behind for us a scene that was without form and void in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. This truth does not threaten our faith. On the contrary, it makes the power of God more majestic than ever. Those fossil fragments, ancient cities, and giant creatures are not evidence against the Bible. They are evidence showing that God is not merely the creator of one short 6,000-year era, He is the sovereign over an endless timeline. Imagine this. The Earth revolves around the sun, and we have a year with 4 recurring seasons: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Then, as the entire Milky Way drifts through the vast universe, could there not also be seasons on a cosmic scale? God is the great farmer of that universe. In the spring of galactic ages, he sows life, allowing civilizations to multiply and flourish. But when pride rises, when Lucifer's rebellion spreads across the kingdom, the winter of judgment comes freezing and burying everything. But God never gives up on his creation. When wrath has passed upon the very cold, water-covered ruins of Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, the great farmer rolls up his sleeves once more. He says, "Let there be light," tearing open the ice age and beginning to sow new seeds for the next cycle. This time the chosen seed is us, humanity. We are living on a land that was once destroyed yet was reborn through the boundless grace of God. But the shocking truth does not stop there. Now widen your view beyond the nearest cycle. This is not only the story of human beings once riding on the backs of dinosaurs, and it is not only the age of Adam and Eve, the age in which we live today. The gap of millions of years between the first 2 verses of the Bible is a vast arena. The fossil evidence and archaeological ruins scattered across the planet are quietly telling a much greater story. Before we appeared, there was not only one advanced civilization, but many different superior civilizations. They rose to the height of technology. They possessed intelligence far beyond their age. But then all of them were swept away without a trace, completely destroyed for one reason alone: pride, moral decay, and rebellion against the order of the Creator. So who were those lost empires truly? How many ages of greatness had Earth passed through before it sank into Lucifer's dark floodwaters? Right now, let us unlock the final ruins and discover what those buried civilizations really were. The truth about Atlantis, the continent that was erased, and the warning from the past. When Atlantis is mentioned, most people today think it is only a fairy tale or the plot of a science fiction film. But the truth is, this Atlantis did not begin as a myth. It began as a historical record. The concept of Atlantis was first recorded by Plato, who lived from 427 to 347 before Christ, and who is often called the father of ancient Greek philosophy. In his 2 classic dialogues, Critias and Timaeus, Plato revealed a shocking secret. In Timaeus, Plato wrote that beyond the Pillars of Heracles, meaning the Strait of Gibraltar today, there was a massive island. From there, people could travel to other islands and reach a vast continent surrounded by the ocean. That was the kingdom of Atlantis. According to this record, Atlantis was a superpower. But just as they were preparing for a great war against Athens, an unimaginable catastrophe struck. In only one day and one night, earthquakes and floods tore the continent apart. A mighty kingdom with a highly developed civilization was swallowed by the ocean and completely erased from the face of the earth. The original tradition says that the founder of Atlantis was Poseidon, the god of the sea. On a small island, Poseidon married an orphaned maiden and fathered 5 pairs of twin sons. He divided the island into 10 territories and gave them to his 10 sons to govern. The eldest son, who was given supreme authority, was named Atlas, and from him the majestic name Atlantis was born. But how did Plato know this? Did he simply invent it? The answer is found in Critias. The person telling this story was Critias, a relative of Plato, and also a student of the great philosopher Socrates. In the dialogue, Critias emphasized 3 times that Atlantis was 100% true. The origin of the story came from Solon, who lived from around 639 to 559 before Christ, and who was considered the wisest of the 7 sages of ancient Greece. During a journey to Egypt, Solon was told in detail by an elderly Egyptian priest about a continent lying far to the west of the Mediterranean Sea. The priest described a civilization that would make modern people shudder. That continent possessed countless amounts of gold and silver. Its palaces were surrounded by walls with golden foundations and silver walls, and the interiors were inlaid with magnificent pure gold. Its harbors were crowded with ships. And most shocking of all, they possessed objects capable of carrying human beings into the air. The dominion of Atlantis extended not only across Europe, but reached all the way to the African continent. Socrates, the master of philosophers, once heard about Atlantis and uttered an unforgettable statement. The greatest thing about this story is that it is true, and truth is always more compelling than any fiction. If Plato was telling the truth, and if Atlantis sank to the bottom of the sea about 11,150 years ago, then it means this: more than 12,000 years ago, humanity once possessed a superior civilization far beyond what history textbooks teach us. But where are the remains of that kingdom? Since the 1960s, human curiosity has turned toward the western Atlantic Ocean, stretching from the waters of Bermuda, the Bahamas, and the Florida Peninsula. And from those deep waters, strange ruins began to emerge, shaking the global scientific community. In the year 1968, at Bimini Island in the Bahamas, divers accidentally discovered a great road lying deep beneath the sea. It was paved with massive rectangular and polygonal stone blocks, arranged neatly, flatly, and sharply. Could this be the remains of a grand avenue leading into the heart of Atlantis? Although some scientists later tested samples and claimed that this road was only less than 10,000 years old, its square precision remains a mystery that challenges nature itself. In the early 1970s, near the Azores, a research team drilled rock samples at a depth of 800 meters beneath the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. The results stunned them. 12,000 years ago, this area truly had been dry land. The conclusion from modern instruments matched Plato's description from more than 2,000 years earlier with frightening precision. In the year 1974, an ocean survey vessel from the former Soviet Union captured 8 photographs beneath the Atlantic Ocean, which together appeared to form a massive, ancient, man-made complex. In the year 1979, American and French scientists used scanning equipment and discovered a gigantic pyramid beneath the waters of the Bermuda Triangle. Its base measured 300 meters on each side, and it stood 200 meters high, making it greater than even the pyramids of Egypt. At the bottom of the pyramid were 2 enormous caverns, where seawater was being drawn through at a terrifying speed. Although some scientists doubted the claim and suggested it might only be a cone-shaped mountain, its existence still sparked fierce debate. In the year 1985, 2 Norwegian sailors photographed what they described as 2 ancient cities beneath the waters of Bermuda. They claimed they saw intersecting roads, domed houses, arenas, and temples. They declared there is no longer any doubt. The continent of Atlantis completely matches Plato's description. To this day, mainstream archaeology remains cautious. No one has officially dared to stand up and declare, "I have found Atlantis." But there is one conclusion that cannot be denied. There truly was once a massive continent swallowed beneath the waters of the western Atlantic Ocean. Empirical science is still groping through the layers of mud on the seafloor. But beyond ancient records and broken ruins, is there another way for us to look into Atlantis? This brings us to a strange and controversial phenomenon: past life memory. Whether you believe in it or not, the case of Ingrid Bennett offers a chillingly detailed perspective on how Atlantean society functioned, and more importantly, how they destroyed themselves. According to Bennett's memories, Atlantis did not develop through cold mechanical machinery the way we do. They followed an entirely different path, the union of science and spirituality. The Atlanteans used the power of crystal quartz as their core energy source. One gigantic quartz crystal could provide enough energy for an entire city. They used quartz together with herbs to heal disease. And the key to activating this system was not electricity or computer codes, but spiritual power. Ingrid remembered that in that lifetime she was a priestess, and maintaining the energy of the quartz depended entirely on the vibrational frequency of a pure and steadfast heart. They believed that matter and spirit were one. They used music to heal hearing disorders and fragrance to heal the sense of smell. In transportation, they used magnetic energy to control flying objects shaped like flying saucers. Even more astonishingly, their telecommunication system needed no fiber optic cables or antennas. People with highly developed spirituality functioned like satellite signal stations. Even communication with animals through consciousness, such as dolphins or unicorns, was completely normal in that society. The extraordinary abilities that modern people or ancient Chinese people called mind reading and remote viewing were basic skills among the Atlanteans. Because they understood the power of thought so deeply, their education system did not bury children under memorization and books. They focused on developing the soul, practicing meditation, and raising the vibrational frequency of the spirit. In Atlantis, the goal of children was not to grow up to become officials or to make money. Their highest aspiration was to reach the age of 60 and become a sage. Someone who understood celestial signs guided the community and was honored by all people. Their average lifespan reached 200 years. In a society that had reached such a height of harmony, there was no violence or bodily violation. Even the intention to manipulate another person's thoughts was considered an unforgivable grave crime. A superior civilization. A society that cherished peace and understood the universe. So what pushed that great continent into the abyss of destruction? The answer is the most terrifying virus in all existence: pride. Because they valued respect for the individual and absolute freedom too highly, the Atlanteans believed that each person must be responsible for his own actions. As a result, when morality began to decay, no punishment was enforced. The law became powerless. They abandoned the sacred institution of marriage, leading to sexual chaos. Even insane and perverse acts that overturned morality, such as mating with animals, began to appear. Ordinary people knew this was sick, but they chose to respect differences and did nothing to forbid it. Then pride spread into the ruling class. Scientists in Western Atlantis became blinded by fame and gain. They began to see themselves as gods. They wanted to manipulate the basic elements of the universe, interfere with temperature, and alter the atmosphere. Many sages warned that a catastrophe was approaching. But the crowd, drunk on desire, chose to cover their ears. In Ingrid Bennett's memory, the final day of Atlantis was a terrifying vision. The crust of the earth split apart. Violent earthquakes erupted, tsunamis surged, and volcanoes spewed fire into the sky. Amid desperate screams, flames devoured the gold-plated cities, and the cold ocean opened its mouth forever, locking the great continent into the deep. This collapse was not only a personal memory, it fits completely with what the philosopher Plato recorded. In the beginning, Plato wrote the Atlanteans obeyed the laws of Poseidon, the god of the sea, and lived in peace and prosperity. His righteousness was engraved on a bronze pillar at the center of the island. But then Plato wrote with disappointment in human nature. Atlantean society began to decay. When holy ideas faded and gave way to worldly delusion, desire, and extreme luxury, they began to worship false gods. Those blinded by greed, overwhelmed reason, could no longer distinguish right from wrong, and even rejoiced, believing themselves to be specially favored by heaven. What is worth noting is this: the fall of Atlantis also leaves a sharp question for humanity today. When we look at our present society, are we also walking the exact same road that the vanished continent once walked? A world where material prosperity, money, and fame are placed above compassion and morality. A society where scientists are frantically interfering with nature, editing genes, manipulating weather, and imagining that they can play the role of the creator. An age where evil is sometimes less terrifying than indifference. Tolerance in the name of personal freedom, causing the boundary between right and wrong to become blurred. Atlantis once had everything: wealth, technology, and even what looked like miracles. But when the soul had rotted, none of those things could save them from the wrath of the ocean. The lesson from the bottom of the Atlantic is still echoing. If we continue to follow the same track of pride and greed, will our skyscrapers today become underwater ruins for a civilization tens of thousands of years in the future to search for? The fall of Atlantis is a terrifying warning. But natural disaster was not the most horrifying end that ancient kingdoms ever had to endure. If Atlantis was buried beneath the cold waters of the ocean, then on the other side of the world, another superior civilization was erased by something 1,000 times more terrifying. A deadly light that we have always proudly assumed modern humanity only invented in the middle of the 20th century. Let us step back for a moment into American history. Do you remember the moment when J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, witnessed the first nuclear bomb explode in the desert of New Mexico on July 16, 1945? When he looked up at the fiery mushroom cloud tearing open the sky, Oppenheimer did not quote the Bible. He also did not speak a saying from the Western world. Instead, his trembling lips uttered a verse from an ancient Indian epic. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Years later, when a student asked Oppenheimer whether the test at Alamogordo was the first detonation of a nuclear weapon in the world, he gave an answer that sent a chill through the press at that time. He said yes, in modern times. Why would a great physicist answer that way? Because with his vast learning, Oppenheimer had read and understood ancient texts. He knew very well a terrifying truth: that science has always tried to hide. He was not the first man to create atomic fire. He was only the one who recreated it. Right now, let us leave the ocean and step into the scorched ruins of the Indus Valley. Let us open the great epic Mahabharata and witness the blackened evidence of an unimaginable tragedy, a nuclear war of global destruction that once took place on Earth thousands of years ago. The destruction of ancient Indian civilization. The prehistoric nuclear war recorded in the Mahabharata. Let us open the greatest epic of ancient India, the Mahabharata. Together with the Ramayana, it is regarded as one of the two greatest masterpieces of this subcontinent. Its name means the great descendants of King Bharata. This text was written down in Sanskrit around the year 1500 before Christ. But scholars know very well that the bloody events recorded in it took place at least 2,000 years before the book itself came into being. That means we are looking through a lens of time reaching back more than 5,000 years. This epic records two fierce wars over ultimate power: the war between the Kaurava and Pandava clans, and the war between the Vrishni and the Andaka near the upper reaches of the Ganges River. For centuries, mainstream historians treated these as exaggerated myths, stories of gods riding chariots and firing celestial weapons. But when humanity's nuclear age began in the year 1945, those who reread this epic suddenly broke into a cold sweat, because what was described there was not magic. It was a detailed report of a war fought with weapons of mass destruction. Listen carefully to how the epic describes the first attack. The heroic warrior Adwatan seated firmly upon a flying machine called a Vimana. From the air, he fired down a weapon called Agneya, a flaming arrow carrying endless power. What happened next was recorded with the precision of an atomic bomb explosion. In an instant, a dense darkness appeared and covered the entire Pandava army. The sky collapsed into darkness. Every compass lost its function, an electromagnetic disturbance, an EMP. Violent winds rose and howled, carrying ash and dust. The sun seemed to sway wildly in the sky. This weapon released a terrifying heat that shook the earth and moved the mountains. Animals were burned, and deformed river water boiled fish, and shrimp were cooked alive. The explosion roared like thunder, burning tens of thousands of soldiers into blackened tree trunks. If the aftermath of the Agneya weapon fired by Adwatan resembled a thermonuclear storm, then the second attack carried out by the warrior Gurkha carried something even more terrifying, an invisible killer called radioactive fallout. The second attack is described in a way that makes the reader tremble. Gurkha rode a swift Vimana flying machine and dropped a bomb straight into 3 enemy cities. This bomb carried the power of the entire universe. Its light blazed like tens of thousands of suns, shining at once, creating a towering column of smoke and fire that rose straight into the sky. But pay attention to the description of the corpses. Bodies were burned so badly they could not be recognized. The hair and fingernails of the survivors suddenly loosened and fell away. Pottery shattered. Birds flying in the sky were burned. To escape death, soldiers panicked and jumped into the river to wash themselves and their weapons. Pause for a second and reason with a scientific mind. How could the ancient Indians 5,000 years ago know about symptoms such as hair loss and fingernails falling off? These are exactly the medical signs of acute radiation syndrome. And why did the soldiers jump into the river to wash off an invisible weapon? Clearly, they were trying to wash away the deadly radioactive dust clinging to their skin. You could argue that this was only imaginative poetry. But the physical evidence beneath the earth does not know how to lie. When archaeologists excavated the upper reaches of the Ganges River, precisely where the wars in the epic were said to have taken place, they found countless scorched ruins. Most terrifying of all were massive blocks of stone that had been melted and fused together. Science knows this very clearly. For stone to melt, the core temperature must reach at least 1,800 degrees Celsius. Ordinary forest fires or volcanic activity cannot produce that kind of heat. On Earth, only one force can do that: the heat of a nuclear explosion. The evidence is not found only in India. Deep inside the primeval forests of the Deccan, people have found ruined city walls and even stone furniture that had been completely vitrified. Their surfaces shine like deadly mirrors. This phenomenon of glassified stone has also been found in the ruins of Babylon, in the Sahara Desert, and in the Gobi Desert of Mongolia. It is 100% identical to the trinitite glass fragments found at the United States military atomic bomb test site in the New Mexico desert. All of these geological traces and historical records connect into one perfect picture. They pour cold water over the pride of modern humanity. Around 5,000 years ago, a radiant civilization once existed in India. They developed technology to the point where they understood and mastered nuclear energy. But then, the darkness of greed and the struggle for power pushed them onto the path of self-destruction. They used that very great light to burn their own people. If you want to see the difference between civilization and barbarism, look at the African continent. At Oklo, Gabon, scientists found a nuclear reactor up to 2 billion years old. This reactor operated continuously for 500,000 years entirely for peaceful purposes. That ancient civilization even knew how to use natural terrain to process and store nuclear waste perfectly, leaving no lasting damage to the environment. To achieve material prosperity for 500,000 years, that 2-billion-year-old civilization must surely have possessed a moral foundation and spiritual civilization worthy of such greatness. But what about ancient Indian civilization? The moment they used the power of the universe to attack one another, as described in the Mahabharata, they ended themselves in the most brutal destruction. Now look back at us today. Modern humanity has only been fumbling with nuclear technology for less than a century. And yet, we have already manufactured enough warheads to destroy the Earth dozens of times. We argue endlessly about how to handle nuclear waste. We use it to threaten one another, standing before the greatness of the 2-billion-year-old reactor at Oklo and standing before the radioactive ashes of ancient India. Modern humanity should bow its head in shame. But the searing fire of the atom is not the only way to take the breath from a civilization. If the ancient Indians ended themselves through the fire of war and nuclear pride, then, on the other side of the world, another great superpower was swallowed by a mysterious wrath that burst forth from the depths of the sea. Let us leave the radioactive ashes of the Indus Valley and turn our eyes toward the blue waters of the Mediterranean. Right now, we are going to open the darkest chapter of ancient Europe. This is the story of the Minoans, the first sea-ruling empire in human history. A kingdom so prosperous and wealthy that they did not even bother to build defensive walls around their capital because they were confident that their navy was invincible. And yet, at the very height of that pride and absolute power, this entire empire suddenly vanished without leaving a trace. It was erased completely from the map of the world, swiftly and silently, like a ghost. The Minoan civilization of ancient Europe. The mystery of the disappearance of a sea-ruling empire. From around the year 2300 to the year 1500. Before Christ, the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete once flourished, especially during its final 2 centuries when the Minoan dynasty reached a brilliant peak. At that time, the Minoans dominated the Aegean Sea, and their reputation resounded all the way to Athens. They became a bridge connecting the developed nations of 3 continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa. The Minoan dynasty made full use of its superior geographical position to develop shipbuilding and build a powerful fleet. This was the first naval force in the world. The mighty Minoan fleet was victorious wherever it went, helping the kingdom maintain trade relations with countries such as Egypt, Syria, Babylon, and Asia Minor. At the same time, it became the overlord of the sea. The island kingdoms throughout the Aegean region bowed one after another and acknowledged Minoan supremacy. Even Athens had to pay tribute to them. They were an invincible empire holding the power of life and death over a vast sea. Clearly, the island of Crete was one of the earliest cradles of European civilization. But from some time after the year 1500, before Christ, all the cities on this island were suddenly destroyed in a single night. And this ancient civilization vanished from the earth forever. Thousands of years passed, and the disappearance of the Minoan dynasty remained an unsolved case. No one knew what had brought down an undefeated naval power so quickly. That was until a massive clue was found beneath the ground. In the year 1967, an American archaeologist excavated an ancient commercial city buried beneath a volcanic ash layer 60 meters thick on the island of Santorini, 130 kilometers north of Crete. According to archaeological research, around the year 1500. Before Christ, this city was buried under volcanic ash when the Santorini volcano erupted violently. This may have been the most terrifying volcanic eruption in human history, with ashfall covering an area of 62.5 square kilometers. The cities on the island were almost instantly buried beneath thick dust, and the disaster even affected the entire Mediterranean coastline and the surrounding islands. According to recorded materials, the sky over Egypt at that time sank into darkness for 3 days. In addition, the volcanic eruption triggered gigantic tsunamis, with waves reaching up to 50 meters high, surging into the sky. Wave after violent wave rushed southward, destroying countless cities and villages on the island of Crete. The Minoan kingdom dissolved into nothingness along with them. But to truly understand the horror of this catastrophe, we must set aside the veil of myth and look directly at this machine of destruction through the lens of geological physics. Everything began with a thermal shock beneath the ocean floor. The Santorini archipelago sits directly on the Hellenic tectonic arc, where the African continental plate is continuously diving beneath the Eurasian plate. This enormous friction created a magma chamber compressed under immense pressure, and the Thera eruption became an apocalyptic disaster for one deadly physical reason: the meeting of seawater and magma. When the structure of the volcano cracked water from the Aegean Sea, rushed directly into the magma chamber, which was boiling at temperatures above 1,000 degrees Celsius. When liquid water suddenly turns into steam, its volume expands by 1,600 times. Billions of tons of water vaporizing in an instant inside a sealed space created enormous pressure, blasting away the entire summit of the volcano and shattering the core of the island. The eruption unfolded in a brutal sequence. First, a column of ash and toxic gas shot straight into the stratosphere, reaching an altitude of 30 to 35 kilometers, completely blocking out the sun. When about 60 cubic kilometers of material had been ejected, the magma chamber below was emptied. With no support remaining, the island's core, spanning tens of square kilometers, collapsed straight into the sea, creating a deep caldera. And it was this collapse that triggered the final blow against the Minoan civilization, a mega tsunami. When the enormous mass of water was thrown out of the caldera, it created a wall of water between 35 and 150 meters high at the epicenter. This monster wave tore across the open sea at a speed of up to 400 kilometers per hour. Death needed only 20 to 30 minutes to cross the distance of 130 kilometers. When it reached the shallow waters on the northern coast of Crete, the wave rose upright. The bustling harbors of the Minoans and their entire undefeated naval fleet were crushed in less than half an hour. Bitter seawater surged kilometers inland, completely poisoning the fertile farmland and permanently severing their food supply. This geological wound even caused a volcanic winter on a global scale. The sulfur dioxide gas, or SO2, that rose into the stratosphere combined with water vapor and reflected sunlight back into space. Ice cores drilled in Greenland tree ring growth patterns, in ancient trees in North America, and failed harvests in China all have a physical link to this eruption. In reality, the Santorini catastrophe did not personally kill every Minoan citizen, but it cut through their entire survival ecosystem. With their fleet lost, their harbors destroyed, and their land poisoned by salt, the Minoan Empire quickly collapsed into unrest and was easily absorbed soon afterward. And yet, was nature simply too cruel, or was there a deeper cause hidden behind the wrath of the ocean? To answer that, we must look at what remained of the ruling class of this dynasty. In the year 1980, a British archaeologist excavated the ruins of a palace at Knossos on the island of Crete. The palace covered about 2 hectares and contained several hundred rooms, all connected by winding corridors with an unusually complex structure. Inside the labyrinth, archaeologists also discovered the symbol of the double axe. Scholars generally agree that this was the double axe palace of the Minoan kingdom, since Greek mythology also mentions the double-bladed axe as an important symbol of the palace on Crete. On the palace walls were vivid and radiant frescoes that seemed almost alive. In the storerooms, there were large reserves of food, olive oil, wine, and even chariots and weapons. In a small room sealed with lead, there were many precious stones, gold objects, and royal seals. A large number of beautifully decorated ceramics and finely crafted metal tools revealed the extraordinary talent of the people of Crete. And yet, behind that extreme prosperity and those artistic masterpieces, the light of archaeology shines into a hidden corner so dark that it chills the soul. The most valuable discoveries were tens of thousands of inscribed clay tablets. Among them, one tablet is especially noteworthy. It reads, "The city of Athens offers tribute of 7 women together with 1 boy and 1 girl." What is astonishing is that archaeologists did indeed excavate more than 200 fragments of human bones in a house on Crete, belonging to 8 to 11 adolescents between the ages of 10 and 15. Cut marks from blades still remained on the bones. Greek mythology contains similar records as well. The story says that the Minoan king, seeking revenge because his son had been killed by Aegeus, the king of Athens used military force to compel the Athenians to offer 14 young boys and girls every year as sacrifices to the Minotaur, the monster with the head of a bull and the body of a man. In the end, the son of King Aegeus killed the Minotaur with a cursed sword. Many people once thought the Minotaur and the practice of human sacrifice were only folk legends woven into mythology. But the knife marks on the bones tell a real and bloody story. Later archaeologists excavated a shrine and found evidence that the people of Crete had used living human beings as sacrifices. At the site, many pottery jars containing offerings were found. On the altar lay the skeleton of a young man about 1.65 meters tall. Beside the altar was a basin-like object used to collect blood, and nearby was a sharp bronze knife used for sacrifice. Another skeleton beside it was lying face up toward the sky, with a silver ring on one finger and both hands covering the face. It may have belonged to the priest and his assistant. Many disordered skeletons were found farther from the altar. According to archaeological interpretation, these may have belonged to officials and attendants of the priest who participated in the ritual. Because they could not escape the sacrificial chamber in time, they were crushed to death. Based on the scene, archaeologists have speculated that while the people of Crete were conducting a live sacrifice ritual to beg heaven to drive away the earthquake disaster, the mountain collapsed and the earth shook. The calamity descended, the roof collapsed, and the entire altar, along with everyone present, was buried. Try to imagine the horrifying scene that day. While heaven and earth were shaking from disaster, the ruling class did not focus on evacuating and saving the people. Instead, in panic, they tied a young man to a stone altar and prepared to cut his throat as a sacrifice. And at the very moment that wrongful blade was about to fall, nature delivered its final verdict. From the excavations of archaeologists, we see both the wealth and prosperity of the Minoan civilization, and its moral decline through the legends and evidence of murder and the taking of life. We all understand that a civilized human being can reason, respect life, and live peacefully with other beings. Yet in that civilization, killing could be tolerated for certain reasons, even presided over by the king and the priests. Does this not already show the level of human moral corruption, the confusion between right and wrong? Think a little further. As the king of a nation, when disaster struck one after another, he did not focus on leading the people through the crisis or reducing the suffering of the common people. Instead, he superstitiously used living human beings as sacrifices to heaven, hoping to remove disaster and misfortune. Even officials responsible for national affairs took part. A civilization like that, even if it still preserved a certain level of surface prosperity, was in truth unconsciously walking toward its end. When we look at ancient cities that were destroyed, instead of only sighing over the disappearance of a brilliant civilization, perhaps we should ask ourselves why it happened. All things in the universe truly operate according to laws. If human beings want a civilization to flourish for a long time, they must conform to the laws of the universe and hold firmly to the strength of a kind and upright heart. That is the most fundamental principle. Minoan was not the only case to be erased, and it was certainly not the first civilization to be buried. In reality, the history of the Earth is a chain of repeated cycles of evolution and destruction. And yet, why do we know almost nothing about the cycles that came before us? Why does modern science constantly ignore evidence of prehistoric civilizations? The answer is very simple. Darwin's theory of evolution. For more than 150 years, this theory has become the supreme framework, shaping the entire mindset of the global academic world. It forces every archaeological discovery and every artifact unearthed from the ground to serve one single linear path. Humans came from apes, passed through a savage age of raw survival, and only then gradually advanced toward modern civilization. And what is the consequence? Whenever someone digs up an object dated to millions of years ago, yet carrying advanced technology, the first reaction of scientists is not to welcome it objectively. Instead, they find every way to doubt it, label it a natural phenomenon, or leave it forgotten in the basement of a museum. They would rather cling to a flawed theory written in the 19th century than acknowledge a truth standing right before their eyes. But science cannot progress if it keeps clinging to old tracks. Look at physics. For centuries, Newtonian mechanics was considered unshakable, until scientists began entering the microscopic world and observing how electrons behave. At that point, the entire system of Newton's laws became powerless. The physicists of that time did not choose to run away. They expanded their thinking, accepted the new, and gave birth to quantum mechanics. Human history is exactly the same. If we keep holding tightly to an ideology from 200 years ago and treat it as untouchable, then the true origin of life and of this earth will remain forever locked away as a mystery. Evolutionary theory says that the human brain has become increasingly intelligent. If that is true, then modern science should easily be able to decode the wisdom of the ancients. But reality says the opposite. Look at what ancient people left behind thousands of years ago. The I Ching, the Bagua, the Hetu, and the Luoshu of the East are symbolic systems containing an enormous amount of algorithms and knowledge that modern humanity still has not fully understood. When scientists place the chemical periodic table or the structure of DNA beside the theory of the 5 elements metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, they are astonished by the almost perfect compatibility. In some microscopic aspects, the logical thinking of that ancient system even surpasses the current understanding of science. Or consider Qigong, an energy cultivation system with a history of several thousand years. Long-time practitioners can activate extraordinary abilities within the body and do things that an ordinary person could never reach, even with all his strength. Modern science knows it exists, knows it can heal disease and transform the body. Yet it cannot use machinery to explain its operating mechanism. Ask yourself this: how could ancient people have imagined and perfected such complex and superior systems if they had only just stepped out of a savage Stone Age? The most plausible answer, based on countless archaeological records and geological traces of prehistoric catastrophes, is this: advanced civilizations once existed, not only once, but many times in the past. We did not evolve from apes. In truth, humanity is only repeating the cycles of rise and decline on Earth again and again. If you need real evidence, look directly at these undeniable data points. First is the Oklo nuclear reactor in Gabon, Africa. This is not a few random radioactive ore samples. Leading nuclear physicists have confirmed that this was a large-scale nuclear reactor system designed and operated 2 billion years ago. What is insane is that it operated stably and continuously for 500,000 years without causing a single leakage accident. This is an astronomical figure, an engineering miracle that even the most seasoned nuclear engineers of the 21st century would not dare dream of. Next, let us return to the ancient Indian epic, the Mahabharata. This Sanskrit text is not simply a mythological story. It describes in chilling detail aerial battles in which ancient people used weapons of terrifying, destructive power. The text speaks of a single weapon containing the power of the entire universe, producing streams of smoke and fire blazing like thousands of suns, instantly burning entire armies. war elephants and horses to ashes. Does that sound familiar? It is exactly like the way people describe a long-range missile carrying a nuclear warhead. And here is the most valuable part. That description completely matches the physical evidence on the ground. At ancient sites along the Indus River Valley, archaeologists have excavated human skeletons lying scattered across the streets, hand in hand, with no signs of sharp weapons or attacks by wild animals. What is terrifying is that measurements in this area showed radiation levels dozens of times higher than normal leaving traces, exactly like what happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki after a modern nuclear explosion. But behind those technological heights, there is a far more frightening truth that we find in every record, no matter how brilliantly a civilization develops. Its ending always follows the same script of destruction. And the cause of that destruction does not come from asteroids, nor from natural climate change. It lies in two words: morality. There is an unchanging law when technology reaches its peak and life becomes too easy. Human beings begin to fall into corruption. They sink into material pleasure spend without restraint, and their moral compass becomes completely distorted. When archaeologists conducted deeper studies inside the chambers of pyramids buried underground, or within cities sunken beneath the ocean, they found relief carvings depicting the lifestyle of the people of those ages. These carvings contain obscene and degenerate images so extreme that even modern viewers would blush. That is not art. It is a truthful picture of a society rotting from within, where right and wrong had become confused and morality had slid down into the abyss. And when technological power becomes inversely proportional to morality, that civilization activates its own death sentence. No one and no nation can escape the fair and severe judgment of the laws of the universe. Why was the glorious Babylonian Empire, which flourished for 100 years, destroyed in an instant? More than 2,500 years ago, there was a superpower whose wealth and authority surpassed anything the ancient world could imagine. Its walls were so strong that they were believed to be impossible to breach. And its kingdom was so prosperous that the Bible compared it to a second Garden of Eden. And yet, that great empire was crushed and completely erased in a single night. Why did an impregnable fortress collapse so suddenly? To decode this mystery, we must turn back to the greatest page of its history. The man who created the greatness of Neo-Babylon was none other than King Nebuchadnezzar II, an extraordinary figure from the land of Mesopotamia. To him, no enemy was impossible to defeat. No desire was impossible to fulfill, and no land was impossible to conquer. Indeed, history remembers Nebuchadnezzar II as the most exceptional king of ancient Babylon. It was he who transformed Babylon into a wonder of ancient civilization. It was he who built its temples and many magnificent architectural works. And it was he who turned Neo-Babylon into a mighty, invincible empire, with a reputation fully worthy of its name. He was not only a brilliant warrior and a gifted commander, but also a deeply romantic king. To ease the homesickness of his beloved wife, Amytis, King Nebuchadnezzar II ordered the construction of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, forever writing the story of one of the legendary wonders of the world. One only needs to look at the wealth of the city of Babylon to understand how supreme the authority of King Nebuchadnezzar II truly was. Because of such luxury, the Holy Scripture called Babylon the Garden of Eden of the Mesopotamian basin. Babylon stood between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, becoming the cultural center and the cradle of civilization of the ancient world. The entire city of Babylon was surrounded by two strong, solid, and majestic walls. Because it was near the Euphrates River, it was easy to divert the water from the Euphrates to create a vast moat surrounding the city, forming an extremely powerful protective barrier for Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar II carried out construction on a grand scale, transforming the city into the wealthiest and most powerful land in the Middle East, as well as its most important commercial city. The main streets in the center of the city were paved with white and rose-colored stone. Inside the city stood a tower 91 meters high, with each side measuring 91.4 meters. It had 7 levels in total, and each level was covered with glazed bricks of different colors. The top of the tower was built with glazed brick resembling a divine temple that housed a golden statue. People say this was the Tower of Babel that offended the divine in the Bible. The palaces within the city were decorated with magnificent splendor, especially the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the world. The city of Babylon was built with such grandeur and brilliance that even 100 years later, when the Greek historian Herodotus came there, he still called Babylon the most wonderful city on earth. King Nebuchadnezzar II brought the power of this nation to its peak, and it was also he who led military expeditions to conquer new horizons. Every nation entered by the Babylonian army was defeated one after another. In the end, beneath the sky, there was no longer anyone worthy of being Babylon's rival. However, the height of power is often accompanied by the depth of cruelty. When he reached the peak of power and strength, Nebuchadnezzar II's elite army became increasingly aggressive and warlike, relying on the tremendous strength of his nation. Nebuchadnezzar II launched repeated wars abroad, destroyed the kingdom of the Jews, demolished the holy city of Jerusalem, and plundered and completely devastated the sacred temples of the Jewish people. The surviving inhabitants almost all became slaves of Babylon. Because of differences in customs and religion, they endured various forms of humiliation and persecution. For the Jews, this was a painful and agonizing experience. And so this period was also called the Babylonian captivity. Babylon was vast and prosperous. But for the captives, for the Jews who held firmly to their faith and worshiped Jehovah, God, this place was no different from a hell on earth, a place filled with temptation and brutal persecution. For example, the Bible records that King Nebuchadnezzar built a golden image, and all officials, great and small, had to attend its dedication ceremony. Everyone present was required to bow before the golden image, or else they would be executed. The Jews at the scene refused to bow to the golden image because of their religious faith. They did not worship any gods other than Jehovah. King Nebuchadnezzar then ordered them to be thrown into the fiery furnace. That arrogance and madness did not end when the throne changed hands. It continued to be inherited and expanded in the next generation. When the throne was passed to King Nabonidus, Babylon had already annexed the neighboring Jewish nation, plundered its capital, and incorporated small states such as Moab, Ammon, and Edom. Nabonidus returned to Babylon with countless amounts of gold, silver, jewelry, and dozens of slaves, living a luxurious and abundant life. Every object in the palace was inlaid with jewels, and this royal life caused Nabonidus to begin thinking of himself as God. One day, God gave Nabonidus a dream and warned him to end this sinful belief. If he still refused to change, the punishment of God would come down. However, Nabonidus paid no attention and continued living in luxury and unrestrained desire. One day, Nabonidus walked across the rooftop of the royal palace and was filled with pride as he admired his kingdom. Suddenly, a supernatural force drove him mad, and he fled from the palace, living in seclusion in the mountains for 7 years. The madness of the ruling class was only the visible tip of the iceberg. In reality, the entire Babylonian Empire at that time had rotted from its very roots. Babylon was not only a hell on earth for the Jewish saints, but also a place of chaos and moral corruption. Because it was the capital of the kingdom and the commercial center of the Middle East, the moral decline of Babylon affected many other nations and regions. In the Bible, in the book of Revelation, it is written, Great Babylon is the root of evil, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. This is the dwelling place of demons, a prison for every unclean spirit, a prison for every unclean and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk the wine of the madness of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich through the abundance of her luxury. The Jewish prophet, even while being persecuted, still preached morality and true faith. But the Babylonians absolutely refused to accept it. In the end, the prophet could only lament, "We wanted to heal Babylon, but she could not be healed." Perhaps this was also the main reason why this civilization was destroyed, just as the book of Revelation says, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great." She has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every unclean spirit, a prison for every unclean and hateful bird. It was so glorious, and yet why did the Babylonian Empire decline in a single short night? Although Nabonidus later returned to normal life, his descendants still did not listen to his warning. After succeeding his father as king, Belshazzar continued to indulge in debauchery, pleasure, and unrestrained desire. God once again gave a warning through the writing on the wall. "Your days are numbered. Your kingdom will be given to the Medes and the Persians." The rise of Persia upon the ashes of Babylon was a turning point that shook history. But what haunted later generations most was not the greatness of the conquerors, but the way the greatest fortress of the ancient world collapsed. How could a mighty empire possessing walls called impossible to breach be completely erased within only a few hours without even a bloody massacre outside the gates? The truth about that dark night is more thrilling than any work of fiction. Let us rewind to that exact fateful moment, the final night of the Babylonian Empire and the fall of the blasphemer. Let us turn back the timeline to the year 538 before Christ. At that time, we are standing in the final days of the great Babylonian Empire. The one sitting on the throne is Belshazzar, the last king of the empire and the grandson of the infamous tyrant Nebuchadnezzar. At this moment, the political situation is stretched tight like a bowstring. War between Persia and Babylon has broken out. Cyrus the Great, the extraordinary king of Persia, is leading a mighty army right up to the gates of Babylon. The great enemy is standing directly before them. The blade is already at their throat. What do you think an ordinary king would do? Declare a state of emergency, climb the city wall, and take command? No. Belshazzar had an utterly insane way of thinking. He casually assumed that the walls of Babylon were a masterpiece of defense so solid and secure that no power on earth could break through them. Relying on that extreme arrogance instead of preparing for battle, Belshazzar decided to hold a wild banquet inside the palace. He summoned nearly 1,000 of the highest-ranking officials of the kingdom to feast, indulge in wine and pleasure, and drown themselves in luxury as an act of defiance against the enemy outside. But the arrogance did not stop there. Belshazzar personally wrote his own death sentence when he decided to cross a forbidden boundary. In the middle of his drunken frenzy, Belshazzar ordered the cups, vessels, and utensils made of pure gold and silver to be brought out. These were not ordinary objects. They were sacred vessels that his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar had stolen many years earlier from the Holy Temple of the Jews in Jerusalem. These vessels had originally been crafted only for service and worship before God Jehovah. For Belshazzar to use them for pouring wine, drinking in drunkenness, and singing with his concubines was not merely arrogance. It was an act of insult, blasphemy, and the most extreme defilement against Jehovah God. And then the Creator answered. At the very moment when 1,000 people in the great hall were drunk, a terrifying scene appeared, chilling everyone to the bone. An invisible hand suddenly emerged from empty space, suspended in midair, and began writing mysterious prophetic words on the plaster wall of the palace. That writing carried a cold message. The Babylonian Empire has been weighed on the scales, judged and sentenced to destruction. This is also the origin of the classic phrase, the writing on the wall, meaning a sign of coming doom. And yet, faced with that supernatural and shocking warning, Belshazzar still remained trapped in delusion. His arrogant self had blinded his reason, so he neither awakened nor repented. And while the elite of Babylon were dancing, history was turning a page outside the city walls. Because of their contempt for the enemy and their arrogance, all the officials and generals were busy attending the grand banquet. No one even bothered to step onto the watchtower to inspect the situation. Outside, King Cyrus of Persia was proving why he was a military genius. Cyrus recognized Babylon's only weakness. The Euphrates River flowed through the city. Instead of launching a bloody siege, Cyrus ordered his soldiers to dig canals and divert the water, draining one branch of the river that flowed into Babylon. When the riverbed dried and lay exposed, Cyrus took advantage of the pitch-black night and led his elite forces straight through that muddy path, easily slipping past the massive moat and entering the city. When they arrived inside, the Persian soldiers could hardly believe their eyes. Because of overconfidence and drunkenness, the Babylonian guards had not even bothered to close the inner city gates. The gates stood wide open. There was no alarm. There was no resistance. The Persian army poured in like a ghost, without spending any effort. Without needing a single bloody hand-to-hand battle, Cyrus completely captured proud Babylon. That very night, Belshazzar was killed. The history of the mighty kingdom of Babylon was officially erased. The place that had once been one of the most prosperous and glorious centers of the ancient world gradually became a wasteland and eventually turned completely into ashes of history, exactly as the judgment recorded in the Bible declared. Because of their sin, this place shall be desolate forever. But the story does not end only with destruction. It opens into a lesson about tolerance and greatness. After conquering Babylon, Cyrus the Great did not behave like a bloodthirsty dictator. In complete contrast to the brutality of earlier dynasties, he treated the Jews with extraordinary kindness. He showed absolute respect for their religion. Cyrus immediately issued a decree ending all oppression, freeing all the Jews who had been enslaved and allowing them to return freely to their homeland, Jerusalem. He returned all the property and sacred vessels that had been plundered, and even provided funding for them to rebuild the Jewish temple. Because of that kindness and religious tolerance, the Persian Empire created by Cyrus flourished brilliantly and lasted for more than 200 years. And to this day, the people of Iran still honor Cyrus as the father of the nation. So what is the core lesson behind this historical file? The kingdom of Babylon was once an incomparable superpower, yet it was destroyed in a sudden and dramatic single night. On the surface, historians may say the reason was an immoral and foolish king, contempt for the enemy, and the fact that while the great Persian army approached the city, was still drowning itself in wine and drunken feasting. But when we peel back the layers to the true essence, the seed that led to this destruction was moral decay and the corruption of the human heart. It was the devastating consequence of human beings becoming arrogant, despising the divine, oppressing the Jews who carried true faith and defiling their belief. The law of cause and effect in history has never failed. Whether it is a nation, a government, an organization, or an individual, no matter how much wealth, military power, or supreme status you possess, if you stain yourself by persecuting religion or true faith in the end, you will face destructive punishment. Babylon is ironclad proof of this. In any country, among any people, no matter how wealthy they may be, whenever they persecute upright faith and true religion, the inevitable result is destruction. By contrast, look at Cyrus. After defeating Babylon by treating people of faith with kindness, Cyrus is still honored by later generations as a legend to this very day. That is an unchanging truth of humanity from ancient times until now. Only when you treat true religion kindly, only when you treat those who believe in gods and Buddhas, and those who truly cultivate with kindness, can you receive a good return. Power will fade. Even the strongest city walls will turn to dust. But people like Cyrus the Great, those who know how to revere and protect faith, will leave behind a noble name that echoes the rough the ages. As Cyrus the Great treated the faithful with kindness, his noble name would be remembered through the ages for thousands of generations. The destruction of Babylon became a classic lesson on the law of cause and effect in ancient writings. But before Babylon ever came into existence, before the Bible recorded the wrath of God and the great flood of Noah, another civilization had already faced an apocalypse named water. They did not collapse because of swords or ambition. They collapsed because they stood in the path of the ocean. This time the judgment was not written on palace walls. It was buried deep beneath the floor of the North Sea. Doggerland, the sunken continent beneath the North Sea. Place a map of Europe on the table and look toward the northwest. To the west, you have England. To the east, you have the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, and Denmark. Between these lands lies a cold, stormy body of water, the North Sea. That is the geography of the 21st century. But what if I told you that around 10,000 years ago, that vast sea did not exist at all? That place was once a broad continent, a fertile land with rushing rivers, dense forests, and sweeping plains. Tens of thousands of people lived there, made fire hunted, and called that land home, and then their entire world was erased, completely drowned beneath the deep sea. This is not a legend or a fictional version of Atlantis. This is Doggerland, a real prehistoric continent, confirmed today by science geology and the most advanced seabed scanning technology. How do we know that such a world once existed? The answer did not come from archaeologists digging on land. It came from fishing nets and dredging machines beneath the ocean. Throughout the 20th century, fishermen drifting across the North Sea repeatedly pulled up things that did not belong to the ocean. In the year 1931, the fishing vessel Kalinda cast its net near the Ower Bank east of Norfolk. When the net was pulled up instead of fish, they brought up a giant block of peat. And embedded firmly inside that peat was a barbed spear point made from red deer antler, a sharp weapon of Mesolithic human beings. From that moment, Doggerland officially stepped out of the shadows of legend and became a real archaeological case. More recently, research from the University of Bradford and the Europe's Lost Frontiers project used geophysical data sediment samples, ancient DNA, and supercomputers to reconstruct the entire sunken landscape beneath the North Sea. The published evidence shows that Doggerland was not merely a temporary land bridge connecting Britain to Europe. It was a vast ecosystem. The hunter-gatherers of that time knew every hunting ground, every shallow river bend, every fruit-bearing area, and every safe place to set up camp. To them, that world felt solid and permanent. But nature has its own way of reminding human beings how small they truly are. The collapse of Doggerland unfolded in two brutal stages, a slow death and a sudden final blow. After the last ice age, ice melted on a global scale. Sea levels began rising silently and relentlessly, century after century. The continent of Doggerland gradually shrank. Wide plains turned into marshes. Marshes became saltwater bays, and highlands were broken apart into isolated islands. This process happened slowly enough for humans to adapt, retreating inland little by little and surrendering territory to the ocean. But the real catastrophe struck around 8,200 years ago. Deep beneath the Norwegian Sea, a massive geological rupture occurred. Science calls this event the Storegga Slide, a series of enormous underwater landslides that left a scar stretching up to 1,600 kilometers along the ocean floor. It immediately triggered a terrifying tsunami that swept across the North Atlantic and struck directly into what remained of Doggerland. Try to imagine a morning in Doggerland 8,000 years ago. Groups of people were living near river mouths, familiar with the rhythm of the tides. Then suddenly the sea pulled back in an abnormal way, exposing deep mud flats. Stranded fish thrashed helplessly. Birds scattered wildly through the air. And then from the horizon, a thunderous roar rose. The sea stood upright as a gigantic wall surging toward the shore. This was not a flood. This was the destructive energy of an entire underwater landslide driving forward. When that wall of water crashed down, it crushed everything. Tents, tools, weapons, animal bones, and human bodies were swept away or buried forever beneath meters of sediment. Pathways were erased. Fertile hunting grounds instantly became saltwater graveyards. The lucky survivors who managed to flee to higher ground, what is now Britain and mainland Europe, turned back and understood that half of their world had ended in a single morning. For a coastal community, the difference between rising seas over many generations and a tsunami in a few hours is the line between migration and annihilation. That is why Doggerland has been called Europe's real Atlantis. Yet if Atlantis is a philosophical story recorded by the philosopher Plato, Doggerland is a cold historical fact. Thousands of bone and antler points recovered from the Dutch North Sea recorded in archaeological reports by PLOS-1 in the year 2023 are the sharpest physical proof of the people who once lived, fought to survive, and were eventually swallowed by geological history. This event connects in a chilling way with the oldest flood traditions of humanity. From the Epic of Gilgamesh to Noah's great flood in the Bible, water always serves as the absolute boundary between an old sinful world and a new world that has been cleansed. Doggerland brings those religiously colored stories back into the realm of empirical archaeology. Prehistoric human beings truly witnessed the ground beneath their feet turn into ocean. Doggerland leaves modern humanity with a profound humility. Here we sit in the 21st century, always assuming that coastlines are fixed, that magnificent cities are untouchable, and that the world map is something eternal. But beneath those cold waves of the North Sea, there was once a continent where human beings walked barefoot. They had language families, children gathering seashells along the shore, and ancient fears deep in their hearts. Then nature acted, and everything was erased. If a vast continent like Doggerland could disappear and be forgotten for nearly 10,000 years, then right now, beneath the floors of the world's oceans, how many other great civilizations are lying silently in the darkness, waiting for a sediment drill or a fishing net to accidentally pull them back into the light of humanity? Babylon was crushed because of arrogance and moral decay. Doggerland was erased by a severe act of punishment from nature. Two stories, two timelines, yet the same script, the reset of the earth. Look again at our world today. We take pride in artificial intelligence technology and space achievements and in skyscraping megacities. But we are also repeating the exact footsteps of Babylon, the decline of moral standards and the worship of material things. History has proven that when the technology of a civilization rises to its peak, while its moral compass breaks, a cleansing becomes unavoidable. Whether it comes through a geological catastrophe that suffocates an entire continent like Doggerland or through an internal collapse like Babylon, the earth does not need us in order to exist. Even the greatest among us will eventually become nothing more than fragments of bone and stone tools left behind beneath the ocean floor. The mystery of Noah's Ark and the great flood that drowned mankind. After losing their first two sons, Adam and Eve continued to live for a very long time. Because when the world had just been created, people lived for hundreds of years. Their souls were sorrowful, because their sons had left them in such a tragic way. But they did not allow grief to defeat them. Over time, they had more children, and among them the first was a boy who looked very much like Abel. They named him Seth. When Seth reached adulthood, he married and established a lineage that would continue for many centuries, eventually producing the man who saved the world from the punishment of God. Finally, when Adam and Eve died, 800 years after the birth of Seth, their family had grown into a large people. The land where they lived and labored was no longer lonely and desolate, but fertile and crowded with their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and later descendants who grew up and then had children of their own. That world must have been a good and wondrous world. However, the seed of corruption always sprouts in proportion to the development of society, and it seems that the more people there were upon the earth, the more wickedness and corruption increased. Among those who were living, only a few found favor in the eyes of God because of their love for what was good and what was right. Those few belonged to the line of Seth. One of them was Enos. He walked and talked with God just as Adam had done when he was still in the Garden of Eden. Another descendant of Enos was named Methuselah, the man who lived longer than anyone else on earth and had many sons and daughters during his long earthly life of 969 years. Among his sons was Lamech, who would have a son who proved to be the most extraordinary among the descendants of Seth. That son was named Noah. At that time, mankind multiplied upon the earth. People worked, played, had families, and no longer remembered their God. God looked down and saw that there were a few people like Noah who worked diligently in the fields and treated others uprightly. And he saw that many others, such as the descendants of Cain, were becoming wealthy in their cities and worshiping things made by their own hands. Very few men or women gave any thought to God, the one who had created them. People seemed to have forgotten how to live rightly with one another, and even more, they no longer loved their God. They had become so careless and senseless that they no longer knew what was right. Or it seemed they no longer cared to know. Something had to be done. God gave a warning, "My spirit shall not remain with mankind forever." If they do not overcome this corruption or wickedness, their lifespan shall be no more than 120 years. But it seems that people did not listen to him. They paid no attention to the warning of God. Instead of changing and living better lives, they became worse. And God saw that the world was filled with evil and wrongdoing. Human beings were not only corrupt in their actions, but also corrupt in their thoughts, and their hearts were continually filled with evil. God was grieved by what he saw. He regretted that he had placed mankind in this world. In sorrow, he said, "I will wipe mankind whom I created from the face of the earth." Not only mankind, but also every animal, every insect, and every bird of the sky, for I regret that I made them. But even in those days there was still one man who found grace in the eyes of the Lord. That man was Noah. Like his great-grandfather Enos and his ancestor Adam, Noah walked and talked with God. In the middle of a world completely corrupted, he alone lived uprightly and kept his whole household on the path of God. He had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and all 3 sons lived uprightly. God said to Noah, "The time has come to bring this violence and wickedness to a complete end. I will destroy every living creature, and with them the whole world. But you, Noah, must build an ark of cypress wood. You shall divide the ark into rooms and cover it with pitch inside and outside so that water cannot enter. The ark shall have 3 levels, the lower level, the second level, and the third level, and it shall be 14 meters high. Its length shall be 137 meters. Its width shall be 23 meters. Noah listened as God spoke to him and was astonished. He had never built a boat because he lived far from the sea and had never needed such a thing. Surely he had never imagined that one day he would build a vessel of such enormous size. But God taught him how to build it. The ark would be built very strongly with a firm frame of sturdy wood, a raised roof, so water could not flood the deck, a window on one side, and one large door for entering and leaving. When it was finished, it looked like a gigantic houseboat. But for what purpose? The answer came immediately. God said, "There will be a great flood over all the earth, and every living thing under heaven will be destroyed. But with you, Noah, I establish a promise. When you have finished building the ark, go into it, you and your wife, your 3 sons, and their families. I have seen that you are upright, and I will save you. As for all living creatures except mankind, you shall bring into the ark 1 pair of each kind, so that they may survive with you. 1 pair shall include 1 male and 1 female. Of every bird of the sky and every animal that is essential for human beings, such as sheep and cattle, you shall bring 7 pairs of each kind into the ark, so that they may reproduce again in abundance upon the earth when the flood waters have receded. And you shall gather every kind of food and store it in the ark to provide for you for all the animals and for the creeping creatures that will live with you in the ark." Noah felt that this was a strange task he had to carry out, but he obeyed because he believed in God. It took a long time and much labor to build the ark, gather the animals, and collect and store food. And it was not easy to do all of this while being mocked by his neighbors. He warned them about the coming great flood, pleaded with them to repent and save themselves. But they laughed loudly at him and at his enormous ark because he lived very far from the sea, and they did not believe that they were in danger from God. They could not believe it because they did not believe in God, and they could not imagine a flood so terrible that it would destroy everything they had, including their own lives. So they continued mocking him and continued in their wicked way of life. But Noah continued building the ark while his children gathered the animals and the food. And then human arrogance had to pay a terrible price. The appointed time had come. When God told him to enter the ark, God said, "In 7 days I will cause rain to fall upon the earth. It will rain for 40 days and 40 nights. Bring the animals into the ark, pair by pair, and bring your family as well. Every living creature that is not in the ark will be wiped from the face of the earth." Noah entered the ark with his sons and his wife, along with the wives of his sons. Pair by pair, the birds, the animals, and the insects, male and female, followed that human family into the ark. Then Noah closed the door and waited. He did not have to wait long. 7 days after God's final warning, the floodwaters filled the earth. It was in the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 27th day of the 2nd month. The great underground fountains burst open, and the windows of heaven were thrown wide. Water poured down from the sky. From the flooded ground, people ran into their homes to escape the flood. Then, unable to escape the water, they fled up into the hills and mountains. There was no place to hide. The rivers rose high above their banks and poured across the land. The great ponds and lakes merged into even larger bodies of water, and the water level slowly rose higher and higher. The ark floated steadily on the rising waters, and rain lashed against the pitch-covered roof. Inside, righteous Noah and his whole family were safe and dry. With them were pairs of animals of every kind. Only they and those animals floated upon the waters of the great flood. Though they were completely cut off from the earth, they had enough food with them to last for many months, if necessary. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Outside the ark, small streams became raging rivers. Rivers became walls of water, turning the land into an immense lake dotted with tiny islands that had once been highlands. Rainwater joined with seawater and swept away coastlines and valleys. The hills vanished beneath the rising water. The water continued to rise higher and higher, covering the high hills and even the tallest mountain peaks under heaven. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere to survive. Every person, every animal, every bird of the sky, and every insect was swept away by the great flood until nothing remained in the world except a covering of water and one wooden ark floating upon the deep. And then the rain stopped. At the end of 40 days and 40 nights, God remembered Noah and every living creature that was with him in the ark. And God caused a wind to pass over the earth to calm the waters. He caused the fountains to stop, closed the windows of heaven, and held the rain back in the sky. The great seas that had covered the earth began slowly to recede. For more than 6 months, the ark continued floating upon the silent sea, the only living thing in the entire world. Slowly, day after day, over the course of 150 days, the waters receded. On the 17th day of the 7th month, from the day the rain began, the ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat in the region of Mesopotamia. By the first day of the 10th month, distant mountain peaks could be seen from the ark. At the end of 40 days, as the waters continued to recede, Noah opened the window of the ark, released a raven, and watched it fly in circles through the lonely sky. It was the only living creature at that moment outside the ark, though it searched and found no dry ground. Noah also released a dove, knowing that if there were any dry land, the dove would gently land there. But unlike the raven, the dove returned. Noah reached out his hand and brought it back into the ark. 7 days later, he released the dove again. This time, it returned in the evening, holding a fresh young olive leaf in its beak. Then Noah understood that the waters had receded enough from the earth for life to begin again, and that somewhere living trees had lifted their branches above the vast waters. Even so, he waited another 7 days, then released the dove once more. It never returned. And on the first day of the first month, in the 601st year of Noah's life, the earth was free from the floodwaters. Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked out upon a world that was full of promise, yet deeply strange. The ground was dry, but he was no longer in the land he once knew. God spoke to him again and said, "Come out of the ark. Bring your wife, your sons, and the wives of your sons with you, along with all the birds, animals, and insects. Release them back onto the earth so they may be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth." So Noah opened the large door of the ark, the same door through which his strange crew had entered in groups 1 year earlier. Then each creature, pair by pair, followed Noah and his family out onto the wondrous dry ground. At last the world was alive again. On the fully dry earth, Noah immediately built an altar to thank God and express gratitude for being saved. Upon those uncut stones, he burned offerings to God, the one who loved him, and gave thanks for the hopes of the world. God smelled the sweet fragrance of Noah's offerings and was pleased with what was in the heart of this righteous man. And God swore within his heart that he would never again curse the ground to punish humanity and destroy all life upon the earth. He promised, as long as the earth remained seed time, and harvest cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. Then God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "The earth is yours. Be fruitful and multiply. Have many descendants and fill the earth." He gave them the earth and all that lived upon it. Then he set a great ark of beautiful colors across the sky. "This is the sign of the covenant between us," he declared. "I establish my covenant with you, with all living creatures that you brought with you and with your children, for all generations. I place my rainbow in the sky as a reminder of my covenant with every living being on the earth. When you see it, you will remember what I have said to you, and you will know that I remember. And this is the everlasting oath. The waters shall never again become a flood that wipes out every living creature. There shall never again be a great flood to destroy mankind from the face of the earth." The sky had cleared, the rainbow had appeared, and the oath of God still remained. The earth would never again be cleansed by water. But that does not mean humanity has received a death-proof exemption. Once the moral compass continues to slide, once greed and arrogance again exceed the limits of the universe, who can say what form the next punishment prepared for us may take? History, in the end, is still only one great cycle. If extinction-level water disasters such as Doggerland or the Great Flood were real, then who were the survivors? When civilization was reset, who passed down advanced knowledge of astronomy, architecture, and mathematics to people of the Stone Age? There is a massive temple complex that was built right after that catastrophe and then deliberately buried by human hands to hide its existence. A place that preserves the secret of beings who came down to Earth to teach mankind forbidden knowledge. Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, the survivors before the Great Flood. If Doggerland shows us a prehistoric world that sank beneath the North Sea, then Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe raise an even deeper question. Before the first civilizations we study in textbooks appeared, had human beings already built massive ritual centers with organization, symbolism, technical knowledge, and a very deep memory of catastrophe? Göbekli Tepe is located in the Şanlıurfa region of southeastern Turkey. UNESCO identifies this site as belonging to the pre-pottery Neolithic period, around 9,600 to 8,200 before Christ, meaning about 11,500 years ago. The structures there include large stone circles, oval and rectangular constructions, and T-shaped stone pillars carved with images of wild animals. UNESCO describes these as megalithic structures built by groups of hunter-gatherers, most likely serving ritual purposes and carrying exceptional value because they are among the earliest expressions of monumental architecture created by human beings. The point that forced archaeologists to rethink Göbekli Tepe lies in its age. It appeared before Sumer, before writing, before the cities of Mesopotamia, before the Egyptian pyramids, and thousands of years before Stonehenge. According to ancient history, human beings at that time were still mainly living by hunting and gathering. They had no cities, no states, no metal tools, and no writing system. But at Göbekli Tepe, we find stone pillars weighing tens of tons, cut, transported, raised upright, arranged according to a ritual layout, and carved with highly refined technique. In other words, before humanity had cities in the classical sense, this place already had monumental ritual architecture. Before there were Sumerian kings, this place already had communities capable of organizing large-scale labor. Before written history began, this place already had religious symbols, animal figures, human-shaped stone pillars, and our areas built according to a plan. Archaeology magazine called Göbekli Tepe a place that forced scholars to reconsider the idea that agriculture and settled villages developed first and only afterward did large-scale ritual appear. New discoveries suggest that the story may be far more complex. Karahan Tepe is located in the same Şanlıurfa region within a network of prehistoric sites often called Taş Tepeler, meaning stone hills. It is closely connected to Göbekli Tepe through its T-shaped pillars, animal symbolism, ritual structures, and pre-pottery Neolithic date. Recent reports from the excavation team say that Karahan Tepe contains structures dating from around 9,400 to 8,000 before Christ, with traces of habitation and ritual lasting for about 1,500 years. The art newspaper quoted archaeologist Necmi Karul as saying that Karahan Tepe was inhabited during the period from around 9,400 to 8,000 before Christ, then deliberately filled in and abandoned. One recently announced discovery: there is a stone pillar with a human face showing that the people of that time had developed the ability to express human imagery in stone very early. This places Karahan Tepe within the same world of thought as Göbekli Tepe, while also showing that this network was larger than a single site. So what is the greatest mystery? Many people often ask, how did they build these structures? That question is fascinating. But the deeper question lies elsewhere. Why did they bury them? At Göbekli Tepe, the large enclosures were found filled with earth rubble, tool fragments, animal bones, and material from human activity. Researchers from the German Archaeological Institute in the Tepe Telegrams blog observed that the fill material inside the enclosures is fairly uniform, consisting of crushed limestone sculptural fragments, stone tool fragments, and many animal bones supporting the possibility of intentional backfilling events. A study by Klaus Schmidt also described how the older sanctuaries at Göbekli Tepe were quickly and deliberately buried as part of their use history. This makes Göbekli Tepe a very strange case. The builders poured enormous effort into raising pillars, carving symbols, and creating ritual circles, and then later filled them in again in an organized way. That action may have carried ritual meaning, marked the closing of a phase of use, protected the structure's reflected community change, or represented a transition to new structures. Scholars continue to debate it. For anyone passionate about history, this is a paradox that strikes directly at the mind. Why would a prehistoric culture build a massive spiritual center and then deliberately erase it from the surface of the earth? That is exactly what happened at Göbekli Tepe, and it was not an isolated phenomenon. At Karahan Tepe, another site located not far away, archaeologists also discovered a similar pattern. The latest reports confirm that Karahan Tepe was deliberately and highly systematically filled in before being completely abandoned. The carefully packed earth and stone helped preserve the pillars and complex structures beneath it almost perfectly. We can see that the burial of great monuments was not a random event or an impulsive decision at Göbekli Tepe. It was a widespread and calculated cultural practice across the entire prehistoric Taş Tepeler network. From an archaeological standpoint, the existence of Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe is a direct slap in the face of academic prejudice. They shatter the popular image of simple hunter-gatherers living like cave people. Look at what they were able to do. They had no writing. They had absolutely no metal tools. Yet somehow they knew how to cut enormous limestone blocks, raise stone pillars weighing tens of tons, organize labor on a large-scale carved complex, symbolic systems onto them, and maintain an orderly ritual space across countless generations. This complexity forces us to step into a deeper lens where spirituality and grand hypotheses begin to speak. When you stand before these 12,000-year-old stone pillars, you cannot help but ask, who taught them to do this? For what reason would a pre-agricultural community people, who supposedly had to spend all their time searching for food to survive, pour such enormous resources into ritual structures? Why did they have to bury them? What were they trying to protect? Or were they trying to hide something? Could they have carried within themselves a terrifying memory of a global catastrophe? And was temple building their way of clinging to order after a climatic event that overturned the entire world? It is exactly here that the story touches the boundary of Great Flood traditions. But we need to be extremely careful and objective. According to geological data, Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe were built right after the last ice age, a period when Earth's climate and environment changed with extreme violence, especially after the Younger Dryas event. Many independent researchers have immediately connected these sites with the remnants of a global Great Flood. However, empirical archaeology cannot yet conclude that Göbekli Tepe was buried because the people there knew in advance about a flood in the form of Noah's Ark. Could it be that a primal memory of destruction by water, of collapse and rebuilding, had sunk deeply into the subconscious of these communities? And that thousands of years later, those scattered memories echoed and became the original source behind flood legends all over the world. And if we place this system of sites on the same scale as the Book of Enoch, the truth becomes even more chilling. The Book of Enoch, especially the section known as the Book of the Watchers, tells in detail of heavenly beings descending to earth. They brought with them and taught mankind forbidden knowledge such as metallurgy, weapon-making, astronomy, and enchantments. According to Enochic tradition, it was precisely this sudden and excessive volume of knowledge that corrupted humanity and led to the punishment of the Great Flood. Of course, we must make a clear distinction. Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe are real stones belonging to archaeology. The Watchers, however, belong to ancient religious literature outside the mainstream Christian canon. We are not saying that Göbekli Tepe is physical evidence proving the existence of the Watchers. No, we do not need to do that. Göbekli Tepe itself is powerful enough to shake prehistory without the help of any mystical being. But when you place these two worlds side by side on one side stone pillars and refined carvings dating back 12,000 years, and on the other side, ancient writings describing knowledge granted from the heavens before the era of the Great Flood, it creates an extreme pressure on the mind. Could those ancient religious texts actually have been trying to explain the sudden appearance of a kind of technical knowledge far beyond its age? A knowledge that helped hunter-gatherers build Göbekli Tepe. That is the true point of explosion in this vanished civilization. Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe do not simply tell us that prehistoric people knew how to stack stones. They shout that prehistoric human beings knew how to organize the meaning of the universe. They raised T-shaped pillars that resemble human forms. They painstakingly carved onto them the images of deeply symbolic animals: snakes, foxes, wild boars, birds, aurochs, and dangerous predators. They arranged them into enclosed circles, spiritual arenas where human beings gathered. They chose the highest hilltops overlooking the vast valleys below. They maintained ritual fire across centuries. And then they buried the entire place under earth and stone. A society capable of doing all that must certainly have possessed collective memory ritual systems, leadership ability, division of labor, and a supreme spiritual purpose. They appeared before the first cities were born, yet they already had a sacred center. They lived before writing was invented, yet they already possessed symbolic systems. They came thousands of years before mighty empires, yet they already knew how to gather thousands of people around a great idea. Rewind the tape of history. Around 12,000 years ago, on the dry hills of southeastern Anatolia, there were human beings quietly dragging stone, cutting stone, raising stone, and carving into stone. They left behind the name of no king. They left behind no text and no manifesto. Their only legacy is a series of T-shaped pillars taller than a human head, weighing tons, standing solemnly in circles that defined a sacred space. And when that work completed its historical mission, they returned. They buried it underground. This was absolutely a deliberate act. You cannot accidentally fill in an entire hill. A community had to bury countless hours of time and sweat into bringing material from elsewhere, pouring it into the circles, filling every open space and covering the enormous pillars. They may have done this because the ritual of that age had ended, because they wanted to seal and protect this sacred place, or because of some overwhelming fear that today we can only faintly sense through layers of earth. Whatever the final reason was, that act confirms one cold truth. Göbekli Tepe was not abandoned carelessly. It was closed. And if we connect it with the storyline of water and destruction, everything fits together in a chilling way. If Doggerland shows us that the ocean can swallow a continent and erase a civilization, then Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe show us the response of the survivors. In an age when ice was melting, sea levels were rising, the climate was violent, and nomadic life was being pushed to the edge. Human beings chose to build super temples. They created sacred places to preserve their spiritual order in the middle of a collapsing world. Was Göbekli Tepe a remnant memory of a golden age before the Great Flood, or was it the desperate effort of survivors after the chain of climatic catastrophes at the end of the Ice Age? Was the burial of the stone pillars a ritual closing of an age, or an act of camouflage meant to preserve knowledge before an even greater disaster arrived? Could the cyclical floods that swept across the earth and drowned Doggerland have been the origin of humanity's memory of the wrath of God in ancient traditions? Those questions cannot be answered with one simple sentence. But it is exactly this mystery that makes Göbekli Tepe the most perfect crossroads between empirical archaeology, the Bible, the Book of Enoch, and the memory of humanity's extinction-level catastrophes. We are not saying that Göbekli Tepe proves the existence of the Watchers. we are saying it makes the question of the Watchers more haunting than ever. We are not saying Karahan Tepe is evidence of Noah's Ark. We are saying it proves that long before written civilizations were born, human beings already knew how to build complex spiritual systems to confront a world being torn apart by nature. We are not belittling hunter-gatherers. We are recognizing that they were complex, organized, and possessed a spiritual life 1,000 times deeper than what textbooks once wrote. And it is this recognition that truly shakes our thinking. Because if human beings clothed in animal skins 12,000 years ago could do this, then the evolution of civilization needs to be viewed with far greater humility. Human civilization did not suddenly explode at Sumer like a miracle. Before Sumer, there were super temples. Before writing, there were symbolic codes. Before the Bronze Age, there was gigantic stone architecture. And before kings rose up and claimed domination, there were nameless communities powerful enough to mobilize the full strength of humanity around a great spiritual purpose. Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe stand there silent beneath the soil of Anatolia. Like a chilling reminder from prehistory, our ancestors were not simple. They knew fear, they knew worship, they knew organization, they knew building, they knew how to end an age, and they knew how to leave behind a message in stone for descendants. They surely knew they would never meet. Among the T-shaped pillars of Göbekli Tepe and the strange structures excavated at Karahan Tepe, we modern people are being forced to face an abyss of the past. What were those nameless people remembering? What power were they praying to? And in the end, what knowledge were they trying to protect when they buried the greatest legacy of their own hands? Whether you choose to believe in severe climate change or in ancient records of knowledge granted from the heavens, the archaeological truth beneath the soil of Turkey still stands there sharp and undeniable. They lived thousands of years before Sumer. They built organized rituals and deliberately buried the very thing they had built. And when the picks of archaeologists touched those stones, human history was forced to open one more deep layer. Because beneath the soil of Anatolia, we have not merely found a few stone pillars. We have found living evidence that before the first civilization we know of stepped onto the stage, there had already existed human beings capable of creating wonders so great that even today we are still not large enough to understand why they created them, and even more helpless in decoding why they decided to bury them. The collapse of the Bronze Age and the mystery of the Sea Peoples. After passing through Doggerland and Göbekli Tepe, the story of erased worlds now brings us to one of the most terrifying events in human history, the late Bronze Age collapse. This was an event of earth-shaking scale, yet it is often pushed to the margins in standard school textbooks. To understand the magnitude of this catastrophe, you need to set aside the idea that the ancient world was made up only of scattered tribes. Around the end of the 13th century to the beginning of the 12th century, before Christ, the Eastern Mediterranean and the Near East formed a vast globalized network. At that time, Egypt was an absolute superpower. The Hittite Empire ruled across Anatolia. The Mycenaean kingdoms in Greece possessed magnificent palaces, enormous grain stores, undefeated chariot forces, and used the Linear B script. At the center of this world, the city-states of Canaan, Syria, Cyprus, Ugarit, and Mesopotamia were woven together through a bustling trade network. They exchanged copper, tin, gold, ivory, cedarwood oil, wine, weapons, and even diplomatic letters. It was a highly internationalized world. Kings addressed one another with the title brother. They exchanged expensive diplomatic gifts, arranged marriages between royal families, and wrote to one another in Akkadian, the international language of that time. Everything was tightly connected through long-term supply chains: copper from Cyprus, tin from distant regions, wood from Lebanon, and wheat from Egypt. But history has one ruthless law. The more complex and interconnected a system becomes, the more easily it can shatter through a domino effect. And then within only a few short decades, that entire great system vanished. The Mycenaean palaces were flattened. Hattusa, the supposedly impregnable capital of the Hittite Empire, was burned to the ground and abandoned. Ugarit, a bustling and extremely wealthy port city in Syria, disappeared forever from the map beneath layers of ash. Every trade route was severed. The linear B writing system in Greece was completely erased. Egypt was fortunate enough to survive, but it was so exhausted that it lost its influence in the Levant. The Hittite Empire disintegrated. The Mycenaean palace network collapsed. Most regions entered a period of poverty, fragmentation, and illiteracy, the phase that Greek and Eastern Mediterranean history calls the Dark Age. As the Wall Street Journal once summarized when reviewing the book by archaeologist Eric Klein, superpowers such as Egypt, the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, the Minoans, and Canaan all declined at the same time, while the writing system and palace organization in Greece were frozen for centuries. The year 1177 before Christ is often used by scholars as the symbolic marker for this catastrophe, based on the famous book 1177 BC. The year civilization collapsed by Eric H. Klein. This date is connected with the 8th year of the reign of Ramesses III, when Egyptian texts recorded the devastating attack of a mysterious force, the Sea Peoples, or those who came from the sea. Of course, the world did not collapse in one exact day in the year 1177. That date is only a symbolic marker for a crisis that lasted for many decades, with countless causes piled on top of one another, creating what modern scholars call a complete systemic failure. So who exactly were the Sea Peoples? In reality, there was no country called the Sea Nation. Sea Peoples is only a label created by modern scholars to summarize the groups recorded in Egyptian texts, especially during the reigns of Pharaoh Merneptah and Ramesses III. They carried strange names such as Sherdin Shekelesh, Luka Ekwesh, Teresh, Peleset, Cheker-Denyen, and Weshesh. Look at the massive reliefs at the Temple of Medine Habu. Ramesses III had them depicted as a sweeping coalition from islands and open seas, attacking by both land and water. The chilling point is this: they did not bring only swords and spears. They brought their families, women, children, and ox carts loaded with possessions. A recent study of the 5th year inscription of Ramesses III at Medinet Habu also records the Peleset and Sheker as part of a coalition of 5 Sea Peoples groups. Their true identity remains a gray zone to this day. They may have come from the Aegean, Anatolia, Cyprus, the Levant, or the western islands of the Mediterranean. Some groups, such as the Peleset, may have been the ancestors of the later Philistines, who settled along the coast of Canaan. But one thing must be stated clearly: the Sea Peoples were not a unified nation or a regular expeditionary army. They were a chaotic mass of refugees, rootless warriors, pirates, mercenaries, and communities stripped of their lands. And that is exactly why they became the ultimate terror. If they had only been pirates, they would have looted and withdrawn. But if they were homeless communities migrating in mass numbers, then they represented an old world breaking apart. The Sea Peoples are the perfect symbol of this era because they were both cause and consequence. They attacked the palaces, but they themselves were also driven out to sea by drought, famine, earthquakes, and political collapse in their homelands. When a system cracks, displaced, people are forced to move. That mass movement creates enormous pressure on other kingdoms. Trade breaks down, food runs out, armies become overloaded, and riots erupt. The palace system, which depended on centralized control, officially collapses. This is the point that gives the Bronze Age collapse a chilling resonance with our world today. The world at that time was already globalized. A city in Syria could be completely dependent on copper from Cyprus Egyptian wheat and international sea routes. Once a single link snapped, the entire supply chain collapsed. Drought led to famine. Famine ignited unrest. Unrest killed trade. When trade died, armies had no resources to defend the cities. A system that was too complex ultimately became the most fragile and vulnerable machine. Modern climate studies also confirm this picture. Data shows that the eastern Mediterranean region at that time suffered a massive drought. Try placing yourself in the position of a resident of the port city of Ugarit in its final days. Yesterday, everything was still normal. Goods were moving in and out in a lively rhythm. Then merchant ships stopped arriving. Allied kingdoms sent letters begging for help. Food prices rose at terrifying speed. Refugees poured in. Diplomatic letters went out and received no reply. Then on the horizon, the warships of the Sea Peoples appeared. Outside the walls, villages burned. Inside the palace, the rulers bitterly realized that the very trade network that had made them rich was now strangling them. The end of a civilization does not always begin with a great explosion. Sometimes it begins with late shipments, unanswered letters, and border forces losing control. The Sea Peoples, in the end, were only the visible face of a violent illness. They were human beings with weapons, families, and the instinct to survive. But standing directly behind them were drought earthquakes, uprisings among the impoverished, the breaking of supply chains, and the exhaustion of a world that had become too dependent on itself. And the most terrifying thing after this collapse was that humanity forgot how to write. When Linear B disappeared along with the collapse of the Mycenaean palaces, people lost the entire system of records. Human beings still lived, still gave birth, farmed, and fought. But the world of law, accounts, taxation, and history had been erased. History was pushed into a frightening blind zone where archaeologists today must read information from burnt layers and broken pottery instead of written texts. However, this was a selective reset. It did not kill everyone. Assyria survived. Egypt held on. And from the ashes of the old Bronze Age, the Iron Age rose. Smaller kingdoms were born. The Phoenicians expanded the map of trade. The alphabet spread. The kingdoms of Israel and Judah gradually took shape, and the Philistines settled in Canaan. As the Wall Street Journal emphasized, this collapse actually opened the way for an entirely new world order. But the moral lesson it leaves behind remains extremely sharp. A system may be wealthy, but that wealth becomes useless if it conceals extreme inequality. Palaces stored grain, nobles lived in luxury with gold and ivory, while ordinary people starved because of drought and guards went unpaid. A civilization can be invaded from the outside, but it will surely shatter from within because of injustice. So look at this collapse as the convergence of three destructive forces: nature, drought, crop failure, climate change. Human beings wore unrest and massive waves of refugees. The system, a network that was too complex, too interdependent, and too fragile. When these three pincers closed in the Bronze Age world officially came to an end, around the year 1177, before Christ, when Ramesses III stood on the coast and looked toward the north. What he saw was not only an invading army, he was staring directly at the consequence of a world breaking apart. Even if the Egyptian army defeated them in the royal inscriptions, that victory could not save the old order. Egypt survived but sank into weakness. The other superpowers had been buried. The Bronze Age closed. And this is a perfect piece in the larger picture of destroyed civilizations. Doggerland proves that water and nature can swallow a continent. Göbekli Tepe proves that the spiritual thinking and organization of prehistoric human beings went far beyond what textbooks once claimed. And the late Bronze Age collapse proves that a super system of civilization can collapse under its own weight when pressure strikes too many points at the same time. The Sea Peoples came in from the sea, devastated the superpowers, spread terror across an entire age, and then vanished into the dust of history. The message they leave for the 21st century is extremely clear. When a system becomes too complex and loses the ability to protect its most ordinary people, the ocean will bring consequences that no palace or government can control. Today we have satellites, big data, artificial intelligence, and global supply chains. But complexity is never a guaranteed shield for survival. The more tightly interconnected a system becomes, the faster the domino effect can spread. Do not let technological self-confidence blind us to the importance of moral foundations, social justice, food security, and responsibility before the Most High. The collapse of the Bronze Age is a brutal ancient mirror. It tells us that a radiant era can absolutely end with the silence of forgotten scripts, smoke rising from ruined cities, and strange ships appearing quietly at the far edge of the horizon. And when the Egyptians called them those who came from the sea, perhaps they were not merely naming a group of refugees. They were naming the moment when all humanity realized that the old world order had ended forever. So then, if you only read it quickly, you will see a perfect outline of a week of creation. Light bursts forth, the sky opens, dry land appears, plant life begins to sprout. The stars are lit, living creatures fill the oceans and the continents, and everything ends with the appearance of Adam. It is a classic story that almost everyone has heard before, but truth rarely lies on the surface. When we compare those ancient lines of text with the deep geological cuts of the earth, with dinosaur fossils tens of millions of years old, and with the ruins of civilizations erased by water, a massive question immediately strikes the mind. Could the history of Earth be far broader and far more brutal than the short span of 6,000 years that we often simplify it into? This is exactly where the gap theory steps into the light, carrying with it a chilling theological perspective. According to this hypothesis, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens, and the earth is the original perfect work of creation. But when we move into Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, what meets our eyes is an earth that is formless, empty, dark, and submerged beneath the ocean. Why would an almighty being create a chaotic darkness? The answer is, he did not. The desolate condition in the second verse may very well be the scene left behind after a judgment event on a cosmic scale. If we connect this with Lucifer's flood, the flood before the time of Adam, everything begins to fit together in a terrifying way. The rebellion and fall of Lucifer and the angels triggered an extreme crisis in the order of creation. The earth submerged in darkness and water. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 2 is the trace of a world that had been extinguished as punishment. The next 6 days of creation were not the process of making something out of nothing. In essence, they were a process of resetting, arranging the earth again to prepare the way for Adam, the Garden of Eden, and the entire later history of mankind's redemption. And if history contains gaps like this, then the picture of prehistoric life also needs to be viewed with greater sharpness and humility. Modern science has shown that non-avian dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago, long before human beings appeared. The interpretation of the Bible is also divided into multiple lenses. Young Earth creationism, the Day Age theory, and the gap theory. Each perspective is an effort to solve the difficult puzzle of space, time, and life. But the central point does not lie in arguing over who is right or wrong about the numbers. The central point is that we must look at the remnants of the earth with absolute reverence for the Creator, while also accepting that the distant prehistoric ages may not stand outside the Bible at all. They may be contained within the most mysterious gap in the very first lines of Scripture. However, cleansing did not stop in the time before Adam. It repeats again and again, like a merciless operating law over human civilization itself. Look at the rise and disappearance of super empires. Atlantis has always been regarded as the ultimate symbol of a glorious civilization swallowed whole. Even if it comes from the philosophical writings of Plato, the fear that Atlantis leaves behind is completely real. A society climbs to the peak of technology, power, and wealth, only to be shattered by its own arrogance and by the absolute force of nature. And history has proven that Atlantis is not only a legend. We have Doggerland, a stretch of land that once existed between Britain and mainland Europe, sustaining tens of thousands of hunter-gatherers. The sea rose, and then the underwater landslide event known as Storega struck with a fatal tsunami, turning that entire fertile region into the deep seabed. The fishing nets that still pull up human bones and stone tools from the floor of the North Sea today are the coldest evidence there truly were worlds erased by water. But if Doggerland was destroyed by water, then Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe bring us a disappearance far stranger, buried by human hands themselves. These massive stone temple complexes appeared thousands of years before Sumerian civilization, before writing, before metal, before city-states. Why were nomadic people able to cut stones, weighing tons, raise them into complex spiritual spaces, and then later mobilize enormous strength to carefully bury them under earth and stone? These discoveries shatter the image of simple prehistoric humans presented in textbooks. They had organization, the ability to mobilize labor, and a deep spiritual life. But the most painful question is this: who taught them that technical knowledge beyond its age? When we place these sites beside the Book of Enoch and its records about the fallen angels, the Watchers giving forbidden knowledge to mankind, a very fragile boundary between archaeology and theology begins to appear, creating an extreme pressure on the mind. Advanced knowledge always comes together with greed. And when greed moves beyond the moral compass, self-destruction becomes the ending already programmed in advance. The ancient Indian epic, Mahabharata, opens another terrifying dark chapter. These epic pages describe in extraordinary detail weapons that emitted a light brighter than thousands of suns, burned everything into ash, and left behind horrifying aftereffects. Although it is wrapped in the symbolic form of religious literature, modern readers cannot help but feel a chill when they imagine an ancient war fought with nuclear weapons. It forces us to face one truth: when military power is not restrained by morality, humanity can activate its own apocalypse. The fragility of power repeats again in the Minoan civilization. They were once the rulers controlling all trade across the Aegean Sea, with splendid and magnificent palaces. Yet the Minoans were brought down completely by systemic fracture and by the destructive power of the Thera volcanic eruption and its tsunami. The sea sustained them, and that same sea swallowed them. Next comes Babylon, the supreme peak of power architecture and imperial arrogance. In the Bible, Babylon is the symbol of humanity daring to place itself equal with God and challenge the Most High. The impregnable walls and extreme luxury of Babylon ultimately could not save it from judgment. Human power, no matter how great, becomes meaningless before the punishment of God. And finally, every cycle brings us back to the center of the whole story: Noah's Ark and the Great Flood. The flood in Genesis was never merely a weather disaster. It was a moral sentence. It was the response of God to a world that had rotted through violence and sin. In that dark world, Noah emerged as a symbol of absolute obedience. His ark was not only a physical means of survival. It was living evidence that God always observes every action of humanity upon the earth, and that He always preserves the seeds of righteousness. When flood traditions appear everywhere, across the world from Mesopotamia, Greece, and India to the Americas, we realize one thing. The memory of water destruction and the re-establishment of order has been carved deeply into the DNA of humanity. When we connect everything together, the full picture appears with a cold and piercing message. The history of Earth is a continuous chain of resets. Reset by nature, the dinosaurs were swept away by the Chicxulub asteroid. Doggerland sank into the North Sea, and the Ice Age reshaped the map. Reset by civilization. The Minoans vanished, the world of the Bronze Age collapsed completely. In an instant, Babylon was erased, and temples like Göbekli Tepe were hidden underground. Reset by theology, Lucifer's flood extinguished the primordial world, and Noah's great flood washed away a violent humanity. The 7 days of creation in Genesis still preserve their core meaning, establishing order, creating life, and entrusting human beings with stewardship. But behind those 7 days lies a deep abyss of history, where prehistoric ages, extinction-level catastrophes, fallen beings, and miraculous restoration all belong to one great script about the supreme sovereignty of God. This is the final lesson, and also the strongest warning for us. Humanity in the 21st century is complacent with artificial intelligence technology, space stations, megacities, and global economic power. But the ruins of Doggerland, the silent pillars of Göbekli Tepe, the ashes of the Minoans, Babylon, the deadly verses of the Mahabharata, and the Ark of Noah are all sending the same message. A civilization cannot survive without a moral compass. Knowledge must walk together with humility. Power must be restrained by righteousness, and technology must move together with responsibility. The higher a society rises, the more deeply it must engrave this truth into its heart. Life on this earth stands under the sovereignty of God. It has never belonged to human ownership. Burned cities, sunken continents, collapsed empires, and the first lines of Genesis all point to one unchanging law. History always writes the bill for moral decay with its own hand. And perhaps the most haunting question for us today is not what really happened between Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 and Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. The greater and far more painful question is this: if God once re-established order from chaos, once brought down the most arrogant empires, and once cleansed a violent world, then where does our civilization today stand in history? An empire can last for a long time through technology and technique, but it can avoid the death sentence of destruction only through reverence for the Creator righteousness and the ability to return to goodness before the patience of the universe runs dry and the moment of judgment knocks once again. History is not a straight line moving endlessly upward. It is a cycle, and the most brutal lesson that cycle leaves behind always strikes humanity's fatal weakness: arrogance. Every time a civilization reaches the peak of its development, it begins to believe that it has conquered nature and even that it can replace God. But the truth is, Earth does not need skyscraping blocks of concrete or supercomputers in order to keep turning. The universe has its own self-cleansing mechanism. Whenever the moral compass of an age is shattered, the reset code is automatically activated. Science, technology, and material prosperity are wonderful tools, but they are not a life raft when the wrath of nature or the judgment of the Creator comes crashing down. The true strength of a civilization does not lie in what it can build, but in how firmly it can preserve humility, reverence, and righteousness in the face of the temptations of power. The history of Earth still contains countless dark regions, buried civilizations, and ancient texts waiting to be decoded. We have only touched the surface of a massive hidden iceberg. If you are someone who does not accept surface-level answers, and you want to continue joining us as we open hidden archaeological, historical, and theological files, press the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Your companionship is the motivation that keeps us digging deeper into humanity's greatest mysteries. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think our current civilization is walking into the same footsteps as Babylon and Doggerland? I will read and respond to the most interesting perspectives. It is time to close tonight's file. Thank you for listening. May you have a peaceful night, and I will see you again in the next mysteries of SleepCodex.